Faint electrical crackles echoed through the silent mall. A sample television set was playing on its own, the signal fluctuating between strong and weak. NASA has discovered a new comet approaching Earth. Its brightness is expected to reach magnitude 6 by the end of this month and will be visible all night in the northern hemisphere. Comet CL 2026 split at perigee due to Earth's gravity. At 6 p.m. today, spectacular meteor showers can be seen over Siberia. An unknown virus has erupted in Siberia. Over 10,000 people have shown symptoms within an hour. Infected individuals exhibit mania, irritability, and mechanical eating. Experts speculate that the virus spreads through air, water, and contact with infected bodily fluids. The exact situation requires further investigation. A plane flying from Soviet Russia to the United States suddenly suffered a virus outbreak. Passengers attacked the crew in a frenzy, causing the plane to crash over the Arctic. 10 hours after the virus outbreak in Siberia, China reported its first case. The number of infected in China is rising rapidly, now covering 90 of cities. Experts advise everyone to stay home as much as possible, not to go out unless necessary, and to wear a mask when going out. Attention residents, our city currently has ample supplies and will not be cut off. Please do not rush to hoard. Stay at home. The television screen flickered and suddenly went dark. Perhaps it was a power outage, perhaps something else. The dark TV screen reflected the light from the doorway, casting an image of the empty street onto its surface. Suddenly, a stiff, twisted figure slowly entered the street, eerily reflected on the television screen. That figure moved slowly from left to right. As it moved, a mechanical rasping sound could be heard, a hee hee, noise as if the throat were constricted or thick blood blocked the airway as it struggled to breathe. The figure gradually moved away from the screen and disappeared into the street outside. As if nothing had ever happened. The city fell silent once more. Pain. Jolted by a sharp headache, Qin Muyang abruptly opened his eyes. He was lying on a not-so-comfortable bed. But this was not the single bed of a school dormitory. What met his eyes was a stretch of pale whiteness. White walls, white windows, white sheets, white quilt. Even the bedside table was white. Qin Muyang felt dazed. The intense headache made it impossible to think. He braced his hands on the bed and struggled to sit up. He was wearing light blue and white striped clothing. Above him hung an iron four-stand on the ceiling. Without much thought, he immediately deduced from the surroundings and color scheme that he was in a hospital ward. Then memories flooded back. School had just announced summer break. Before leaving for home, Beishan University School of Physical Education, where he studied, and the neighboring Beishan Petroleum University were about to have a friendly basketball match. Qin Muyang, an excellent shooter, actively participated in the event. During the match, he was accidentally pushed and fell, hitting the back of his head on the ground and passed out on the spot. Then when he opened his eyes again, it was now. Qin Muyang woodenly touched the back of his head and found it wrapped in thick gauze. He recklessly pressed on the injured spot, instantly feeling a dizzying spin, a churning in his stomach, and couldn't help. Using his own meager medical knowledge, he deduced he had a mild concussion. After lying down for a while and feeling the dizziness and headache subside, he sat up again. Suddenly, he noticed something abnormal. Silence. The surroundings were too quiet. An eerie silence. As a sports student, Qin Muyang often came to the hospital due to injuries, so he was quite familiar with it. But he had never seen such a quiet hospital. There were always all kinds of sounds, but today everything was unbelievable. Qin Muyang was confused for a few seconds, then turned and pressed the call button by the bed. But several minutes passed, and no one came. Muttering under his breath about nurses slacking off, Qin Muyang took a deep breath and yelled, "Nurse." His body hadn't recovered, so his voice was not loud. Even after yelling, it was useless. No response. What a crappy hospital. Qin Muyang felt around by his pillow, then looked at the nightstand. Good grief, where's my phone? Where's my alarm? Without a phone, unable to contact the outside world, Qin Muyang began to panic. He had no way of knowing what happened after he fainted that day, who brought him to the hospital, how long he had been there. Without his phone, he was completely in the dark. On the nightstand lay several packs of compressed biscuits, some chocolate, and a 500 milliliters bottle of water. Qin Muyang found it strange. Who would bring such things to visit a patient? Don't they bring a flower basket or some fruit? What's with the compressed biscuits? Qin Muyang held onto the bed and slowly moved toward the ward door. It took him 2 or 3 minutes to finally reach the door. Everything felt eerie. He steadied himself and slowly turned the door handle. Outside the door was utter silence. Before him was a dim, deep corridor, the typical hallway of a hospital ward. But because there was no lighting, it seemed rather ghostly. No one moved in the corridor, no extra sound, just an eerie, haunted stillness. Qin Muyang even wondered if he was in an abandoned hospital. But the modern equipment and clean terrazzo floor told a different story. This was a typical hospital, not. So where were the people? No doctors, no nurses, no patients. Only Qin Muyang was there. Qin Muyang felt a chill, but braced himself and followed the sign on the wall toward the nurse station. On both sides of the corridor were closed ward doors, utterly silent, as if all were empty. Qin Muyang didn't dare open any door to see if it was really empty. He just tried to minimize his footsteps and moved slowly toward the nurse station. A few minutes later, he finally reached the nurse station. It was completely empty. On the desk sat a disconnected, harboring a shred of hope. Qin Muyang picked up the receiver. There was no sound at all. Even after he plugged in the cord, no familiar dial tone came from the phone. The power was out. A power outage in a hospital was a spectacle indeed. Usually hospitals have at least one backup circuit that kicks in automatically. A complete blackout like this only happened during a major disaster. Qin Muyang looked around, but didn't perceive any major disaster. Though the place was empty, it still seemed. He took a few more steps forward and in a low voice called out, "Is anyone here?" No one answered. For some reason, Qin Muyang had an intuition that he shouldn't make loud noises, as if he might disturb some unknown life hiding somewhere. Just as he was about to return to his ward to search for other clues, suddenly a rustling sound came from a ward ahead, as if someone in slippers was slowly shuffling along. Qin Muyang shivered, mustered his courage, and moved closer. A slightly ajar ward, the lock on the door broken, a heavy chain lock hanging on it, as if something terrible was locked inside. Why would a hospital room have such a lock? Even if the patient had mania, a dose of tranquilizer and a restraint belt would suffice. Because it wasn't the original lock, a palm-sized gap remained in the door. Just as Qin Muyang leaned his face closer, a gray-skinned hand suddenly shot out from the gap. Qin Muyang jerked his head back instantly. His heart began pounding violently, as if trying to burst out of his throat, slamming against his chest with pain. The gap only allowed a single hand to stick out, so the owner of the hand remained unseen. Once out, the hand immediately began groping wildly in all directions. Dirty nails, knobby fingers, and a faint, elusive smell of decay. Qin Muyang stepped back a few paces, momentarily unable to grasp what was happening. It was a human hand, yet not quite human. The ajar door kept banging from the arm's movements, and a sound like heavy, raspy breathing. Hehh came from inside, sending chills down the spine. Perhaps triggered by the sounds from this room, like a chain reaction, various noises began to emanate from the wards on both sides of the corridor. Some sounds of crawling and scraping on the floor, some of footsteps, others of unconscious hoarse breathing or clicking, as if someone's throat was blocked and they were struggling to exhale. A buzzing sound filled Qin Muyang's mind. Without time to think, he immediately turned back. His weakened body was instantly activated by adrenaline. He went from walking to running, dashing toward his own ward. No matter what monsters were locked in the wards on both sides, no matter what was happening outside, at least the ward he had just stayed in was safe. Qin Muyang ran back to the ward in one breath, swiftly closed the door, and locked it. Still uneasy, he dragged 2 chairs to block the door, then sat down to catch his breath. However, before he could catch his breath, a thought flashed through his mind, making the hairs on his body stand on end. The bathroom. This ward had a bathroom, and the bathroom door had always been closed. He hadn't checked what might be inside. Qin Muyang felt his hands trembling. He grabbed the hanging floor stand, mustered his courage, and moved cautiously toward the bathroom. It was fortunate that he was a sports major. Even while ill, his physical condition was decent. Now holding the floor stand, he didn't find it heavy, and even felt he could swing it as a weapon if danger arose. He pressed his ear against the bathroom door and listened for a while. It was as silent as a vacuum inside, a stark contrast to the noisy sounds outside. He squeezed the iron stand tightly with one hand, as if drawing a shred of strength from it, and with the other hand, he abruptly pulled open the bathroom door. A foul stench hit him, making him retch. In the light from the window, he saw a half-decomposed corpse lying on the floor, covered with wriggling white maggots. On the wall opposite the door was a mirror reflecting Qin Muyang's pale, horrified face. He slammed the bathroom door shut. However, the nauseating stench had already filled the whole ward. With the bathroom threat eliminated, Qin Muyang put down the floor stand and lay back on the bed. A patient is a patient. In just a short while, all his strength had been drained. The burst of energy from before was just an illusion created by adrenaline. Qin Muyang felt his head begin to spin again. But this was not the time to rest. Even if his body rested, his mind could not. He needed to think and analyze to figure out what was happening and what he should do next. How much time had passed since he was shoved while playing basketball and passed out? Outside the window, the sun was bright, a typical summer scene. It felt like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. It felt similar to the day he had been playing basketball, so he might have been unconscious for a day or a week. Not more than that, or the scenery outside would have shown seasonal changes. His personal belongings were definitely all gone. He didn't know if they had been stolen or lost. At any rate, the wallet and phone he had carried were certainly missing. Earlier in the corridor, he had seen the hospital's sign. It was the Beishan City Second People's Hospital, in excellent class, 3A General Hospital. This hospital had always had a shortage of beds, of both the outpatient and inpatient departments were packed every day. But now it was abnormally quiet. In such a large hospital, not only were there no people, but there were also unknown creatures in the wards. And in the very ward he was in, there was a decomposing corpse in the bathroom. Qin Muyang felt his brain was... Now looking back at the compressed biscuits and bottled water on the bedside table, he seemed to understand something. Someone must have deliberately left them for him. Whoever left these didn't even leave a note to help him understand what he was facing. Could it be that the person who left them had no time to leave any other information? The corridor outside still echoed with all kinds of eerie sounds that were spine-chilling. Qin Muyang felt as if he was trapped in an abandoned hospital in an apocalypse. Perhaps it really was the apocalypse. And this hospital in front of him was probably truly abandoned. Still uneasy, Qin Muyang moved another white-painted metal bedside table to block the door. That way, even if the door was suddenly forced open, the intruders from outside wouldn't be able to get in immediately, giving him some buffer time. Until he figured out what was happening, Qin Muyang didn't intend to leave this ward again. After all, what had happened in the corridor was too bizarre. He didn't believe the outside was safe. And there was a corpse in his own ward. This was a society governed by law. If there was a corpse, the police should have come long ago. However, a corpse was still safer than those eerie creatures making sounds. He had no means of communication to contact the outside world, and there seemed to be no other living people in the hospital besides him. Those life forms making sounds in the other wards were still humanoid in appearance, but what their true nature was no. Qin Muyang guessed that some disease had broken out and all the patients were infected. But why was he fine? He couldn't understand. Humans cannot understand things beyond their cognition. The sounds in the corridor did not fade away after Qin Muyang left. Instead, they grew more intense. Eventually, even the wards on the floors above and below started producing those eerie sounds. Qin Muyang clearly heard right through the ceiling of his ward the sound of nails scraping the floor, as well as the strangulated, hee-hee gasping sound. Goosebumps slowly spread all over his body. Despite the fear and bewilderment swirling in his heart, Qin Muyang's rationality remained intact. He quickly deduced that all these eerie disturbances were caused by sound. He had first created a noise drawing the attention of the humanoid creature locked in the chained ward. That creature's thunderous roar then triggered a chain reaction, rousing all the other imprisoned entities on this floor. Subsequently, these sounds affected the floors above and below, and thus the current situation unfolded. It seemed he must avoid making any further noise. Qin Muyang felt relieved that those things were all locked inside their wards, not roaming freely outside. By now he had formed a rough idea of what these humanoid beings truly were. However, he needed to see their full forms with his own eyes to confirm his hypothesis. After all, he had only glimpsed a pale gray arm and heard some strange sounds. Leaving the room to spy on other wards was clearly unwise at this moment. Qin Muyang turned his gaze toward the window. Through it, he might glimpse the outside world and perhaps uncover some clues. Qin Muyang massaged his temples. After a moment of thought, his head felt less dizzy than before, and he had calmed down considerably, no longer as tense and anxious. He paced over to the window, pulled aside the half-drawn curtain, and looked outside. The ward was on the third floor. Outside, a patch of dazzling green grass stretched out, bisected by a narrow path meant for patients' leisurely strolls. Beyond the grass lay a concrete yard, its surface reflecting blinding white light under the blazing sun. At the yard's far end stood the hospital's outpatient building. Qin Muyang immediately spotted the large sign reading Outpatient Building. Ordinarily, that place should have been bustling with crowds, patients coming and going in an endless stream, as befitting a top-tier hospital's outpatient building. But what met his eyes was only the glare of sunlight bouncing off polished tiles. Not even a sparrow was in sight, so was there no evidence to be found at all. Seeming unwilling to give up, Qin Muyang gently pushed open the glass window and stuck his head out, trying to get a broader view. As the window opened, a foul stench rushed in with the hot wind. The summer heat mixed with the odor invaded the ward. Qin Muyang quickly closed the window, but the smell lingered. That stench was identical to the reek of the corpse in the bathroom. Could there be another body rotting silently somewhere? Qin Muyang steadied himself and made the worst conjecture. It seemed everyone in this hospital had either fled or died, and died without anyone to collect the bodies. Otherwise, why would it smell so foul? Suddenly, a thought struck him. He had seen in crime dramas a method to estimate time of death based on the degree of decomposition. The corpse in the bathroom could help him gauge the timeline. Unfortunately, his initial shock at seeing the body had prevented him from examining it closely. With this in mind, he tore off the pillowcase, wrapped it around his mouth and nose as a makeshift mask, then strode over to quickly yank open the bathroom door, glance inside, and slam it shut. 2 days. The body had been dead for at most 2 days. Qin Muyang made the judgment instantly. That meant he had been unconscious for at least 2 days. And the survivors from this hospital had fled at least 2 days ago. In 2 days, one could accomplish much, even fly to Europe. Yet the current situation told Qin Muyang that in just 2 days, even if there were survivors, they couldn't have escaped far under such bizarre circumstances. After all, most people in such a scenario would try to return home. He had seen news reports of earthquakes where people unable to abandon their homes secretly went back to live in them. Moreover, when a plague had once struck this city, people's response was to retreat to their homes, not flee elsewhere. So if he escaped the hospital, he might encounter survivors outside. Then he could understand what had truly happened. Lost in thought, he suddenly heard a sound from outside the window, a shuffling noise like slippers dragging on the ground. Had he not just seen the empty scene, Qin Muyang might have been thrilled at the prospect of someone appearing. But now goosebumps erupted across his skin in an instant. That sound likely wasn't human, and no one would walk like that in such a hospital. Despite his fear, he had to approach the window to investigate. After all, everything was a clue now, and every clue could aid his escape. Treading softly to the window, he pressed his cheek against the glass. Qin Muyang saw a figure in a patient gown slowly moving across the concrete yard. Its steps were slow and unsteady, yet it managed to stay upright. One slipper dragged on the ground, scraping audibly as if one leg was broken. Its form was twisted and grotesque. One side of its body seemed stiff and immobile. One arm appeared to be severed at the shoulder, hanging by only a layer of fascia. As it moved, the dangling arm swung back and forth, a horrifying sight. Even more terrifying was that half of its face lacked skin, exposing the white bone beneath. Under the sunlight, dried bloodstains were visible all over its body. In some places, the patient gown was torn, revealing bite marks beneath. Just as Qin Muyang was observing intently, the figure suddenly stopped its shuffling steps. It turned its head at an unnatural angle, fixing its half-rotted face toward the inpatient building. A pair of murky eyes stared directly at Qin Muyang's location, while a hoarse, rattling breath escaped its mouth. Qin Muyang gasped, stepping back quickly to hide behind the curtain. Though he knew those eyes hadn't actually seen him, it was merely a coincidence. His heart still pounded with the terrifying face slowly turned back. The footsteps resumed, growing fainter until they vanished. Qin Muyang looked out again. The figure was gone. He knew this was the evidence he needed. That very figure. It retained a human form, but moved stiffly, sensitive to sound, yet nearly blind, emitting mechanical choked sounds. Pale gray skin covered in various wounds, bite marks, and lividity, yet feeling no pain. Even injuries fatal to humans posed no threat to that body. Such an image Qin Muyang had seen many times in movies. But in real life, this was his first encounter. That was why when he saw the hand reaching out from the ward in the corridor, he had suspected, but dared not confirm. After all, such images existed only on screen, likely products of human imagination. But now he was certain these things had truly manifested in reality. Zombies. Creatures that hunted the living, feeding on flesh and blood. They had abruptly invaded Qin Muyang's life. Realizing he was trapped in this predicament due to a zombie outbreak, Qin Muyang racked his brain, recalling every piece of knowledge he had about the undead. Though all he knew came from movies and TV shows, and he had no way to verify its effectiveness, no other means of validation were available. The most crucial rule was that bites and scratches could transmit the zombie virus, hence he must avoid direct contact with the undead at all costs. Secondly, the second most important rule was that to kill a zombie, one must pierce its skull or destroy its brain, otherwise even severing its neck would leave its jaws snapping and biting incessantly. Thirdly, if a loved one became infected, the first choice was to kill them, and the second was to flee immediately. Never be swayed by sentiment, clinging to the vain hope that they retained a shred of humanity. One must not regard zombies as humans. They are merely monsters in human form. Even if they were once your parents, children, or spouse, once they become zombies, the closest of kin will tear into you. These three rules were ironclad, and Qin Muyang had to adhere to them strictly, for a single lapse could cost him his life and make him a member of the zombie horde. Beyond these, there were rules that needed verification. For instance, it was best not to venture out at night, as zombies were most active, then easily trapping one in peril. Another was to avoid food bitten by zombies, as it might transmit disease or cause instant death. Testing these rules might not necessarily be fatal, but to test those three critical rules was to court death. After much deliberation, Qin Muyang felt more exhausted than after a basketball game, partly because his injuries had not fully healed, and partly because he needed nourishment and something to eat. The food and water on the nightstand were scarce, barely a day's supply for a young man like him. Yet Qin Muyang did not ration, he devoured and guzzled greedily. He had a clear plan in mind. He needed to fill his stomach to ensure he had ample strength to face what lay ahead. He consumed half of what should have lasted 3 meals without a hint of regret. He needed to recover his stamina quickly to confront the coming trials. Outside the window, the sky was gradually. Qin Muyang approached the window and observed the entire city was pitch black, not a single light visible. Indeed, the whole city had fallen. It wasn't just this hospital that had lost power and water. The entire Beishan city was in the same state. As night deepened, strange noises and roars began to emanate from all around as zombies grew more active in the dark. Qin Muyang heard footsteps echoing continuously in the corridor downstairs, as if lost souls were wandering, searching for an exit. It seemed the hospital was infested with zombies, though his floor was relatively safer with zombies confined to rooms rather than roaming the hallways. Otherwise, he would have had to reinforce the door even more. Qin Muyang calculated that he must leave the hospital as soon as possible. Food and water would soon run out, and with zombies active all around, it was far from safe. To escape, he needed to make preparations and have sufficient energy to cope. But since night had fallen, Qin Muyang decided to get a good sleep first and start preparing upon waking. After double-checking the door and windows of the ward, he returned to the bed and drifted into slumber. He was the type to remain calm in crises, so he slept surprisingly well. At the break of dawn, before the sun had risen, he awoke and began to prepare some essentials. He unscrewed the parts of an four stand, extracting a solid iron rod over a meter long. He brandished it in a quick thrust. The feel was good, and it should serve well against zombies. But the rod had no sharp point. If he didn't strike precisely, it might fail to penetrate. So Qin Muyang ground the rod against the floor until a small tip emerged. Sharpening that tip alone took an entire hour. He was pleased with the result. Unless striking an extremely hard spot, he was confident it would pierce a zombie in one go. With this tip aimed at a zombie's eye socket or mouth, a single thrust would kill it instantly, if those things could be considered alive. Armed with a suitable weapon, Qin Muyang began to take protective measures. He tore the bedsheets into strips and wrapped the cloth around his cuffs and pant legs. The hospital gown sleeves and trousers were loose, leaving parts of his arms and calves exposed, vulnerable spots for zombie attacks. Thus, he carefully bound them with cloth strips. Finally, he tore the remaining duvet cover into long strips and wove them into a rope. Only then did he feel fully prepared. By now, daylight had fully emerged and the sun was peeking between the buildings. The nocturnal activity of zombies gradually quieted down. As morning light bathed the earth, the world fell silent, as if all humanity had vanished, leaving only Qin Muyang. Qin Muyang looked out the window and mapped out an escape route. However, it was merely an ideal path. During the escape, countless variables would arise, preventing him from following the plan exactly. His goal was to reach the desired location. As for the process, as long as he remained uninjured and unbitten, it would be perfect. That would be the most flawless process. Committing the external structure and his planned route to memory, Qin Muyang sat down to eat the remaining food. Escape required strength. Food could not be hoarded. If he faltered during the escape from the hospital, saving the food would be meaningless. After quickly finishing the meal and drinking the last drop of water from the bottle, Qin Muyang knew it was time to leave. With no food or water left, it was a matter of survival or death. He had to leave and never look back. He swiftly stuffed a pillowcase with toilet paper towels and various odds and ends from the ward, and even added the empty water bottle. The empty mineral water bottle weighed almost nothing, but could serve as a convenient water container. Tying the stuffed pillowcase to his back and tucking the sharpened iron rod from the four stand into his waistband, Qin Muyang picked up the rope woven from the duvet cover and fastened it to the window frame. After giving the rope a few tugs to ensure it was secure, Qin Muyang grabbed it and climbed out the window. To avoid traversing the stairwell and descending via the staircase, he intended to rappel directly from the upper floor down to the grassy expanse below using a rope. It was an unavoidable necessity. Though the zombies on the third floor were confined within their wards, those on other levels roamed freely. If he were cornered by the undead in the narrow, constricted corridor, it would spell certain doom. Thus, he had no choice but to take a perilous gamble and descend the exterior wall using the rope he had fashioned. Fortunately, a drainage pipe ran down the outside wall, featuring protruding bumps at regular intervals that provided footholds, ensuring each step had a place to land. The rope served merely as an auxiliary measure, enhancing safety. Qin Muyang asserted that someone with formidable climbing skills could descend without it entirely. The third floor was not excessively high. In less than 10 minutes, Qin Muyang's feet touched the soft turf. Stepping onto the grass, he immediately scanned his surroundings, confirming the absence of any zombie activity before placing his other foot down and releasing his grip on the rope. He had prepared himself in advance. If danger threatened during the descent, he would swiftly reverse course and climb back up. Flexibility in retreat was the key to survival. Thankfully, the hospital grounds seemed relatively safe during the day, with not a single zombie in sight as far as the eye could see. Yet a faint, pervasive stench of decay hung in the air, inducing a throbbing dizziness. Moreover, the weather was scorching. Even though the sun had only just risen, an intense, searing heat was already palpable. This year's summer had arrived earlier and was more blistering than in years past. Qin Muyang pulled a towel from within his pillowcase to wipe the sweat from his brow, then simply used it to cover his mouth and nose, fashioning a makeshift mask to filter out the foul external odors. It was better than nothing, at least diminishing the pungent stench of decay. While making these preparations, Qin Muyang continued forward. His objective was to cross the lawn and head directly towards the hospital's side entrance. He had plotted this route while still in the ward, as it was a path with less foot traffic within the hospital, inevitably leading to a relatively lower concentration of zombies. Exiting through the main entrance was out of the question. Although he hadn't seen its current state, Qin Muyang could vividly imagine the throng of zombies clustered there. This was a large general hospital. The volume of people was unimaginable. Crossing the lawn and following the concrete path for several minutes, he encountered nothing, not even a single bird. Finally, Qin Muyang stepped onto a shaded tree-lined path, the very trail leading to the side entrance. Rounding a bend amidst the verdant foliage, several small white bungalows suddenly came into view, resembling storage sheds from a distance. This contradicted what Qin Muyang had observed from upstairs. He was certain he hadn't taken a wrong turn from his earlier vantage point. This was the only path in this direction. However, he hadn't spotted these white buildings from the third floor. It seemed they were concealed by the dense tree canopy, invisible from that height. Where there were buildings, there was a high probability of people, or rather zombies. Qin Muyang slowly drew the homemade iron rod from his waist, gripping it firmly in his hand. He had no alternative but to steel himself and pass through this area. Within the entire hospital, this was the safest route. If even this path was impassable, then the others were utterly hopeless. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to calm down, mentally rehearsing how to thrust the iron rod and evade a zombie's attack. Gradually, Qin Muyang's composure returned. Clutching the iron rod, he drew closer to the white bungalows. Even through the towel covering his mouth and nose, he could perceive the intensifying stench. It seemed that these buildings were home to either zombies or decomposing corpses, otherwise the odor wouldn't grow so potent with proximity. True to his suspicion, when he was still over 10 meters away, Qin Muyang spotted several rotting corpses laid out in a row on the ground. The scene indicated that the bodies had originally been sealed in body bags. However, for some unknown reason, all the bags had been torn open. The corpses were contorted into strange positions, some bearing signs of gnawing, with significant portions of muscle tissue missing. Qin Muyang deduced that the corpses had been piled here, neglected, and subsequently scavenged by animals like stray dogs. Soon a black dog slinking through the shadows confirmed his hypothesis. He also noticed a sign erected outside the white bungalows, revealing that these warehouse-like structures were in fact the hospital's morgue. Under normal circumstances, stumbling upon this place would have elicited a curse of bad luck from Qin Muyang. But in his current predicament, these lifeless bodies seemed almost benign. At least they wouldn't attack like zombies. The sheer number of corpses piled outside was stark evidence of the immense death toll within the hospital. So many that the morgue itself was overwhelmed, forcing the temporary outdoor storage. Qin Muyang gripped his iron rod tightly, advancing with extreme caution. He was on guard against both the potential attack of a stray dog lurking in the shadows and the possibility of a zombie wandering nearby. The area was riddled with blind spots. Who knew what might be lying in wait in the darkness? These corpses were all decomposed, and with no other food source, the stray dogs might indeed target a living passerby. Qin Muyang had previously seen online videos of large packs of stray dogs attacking people. He skirted the corpses before him and arrived at the front of the morgue. It was then he saw a small square in front, also densely packed with bodies. The corpses he had just passed were merely the overflow from this main area. All the bodies were putrid and rotting, with pale, writhing maggots crawling over them. As Qin Muyang approached, flies buzzed up from the corpses in a massive dark swarm, descending like a black cloud before him. The eruption of flies intensified the stench, causing Qin Muyang to retch dryly. The sight itself made his skin crawl with goosebumps. The stench was indescribably foul, surpassing even the vile concoction of a sock soaked for a month in a bucket with a rotten rat. It was not even a tenth as offensive as this. Despite considering himself a connoisseur of foul odors, seasoned by experience, the scene before him was still staggering. He was after all a man who could tolerate the stench of a dormitory full of unwashed feet. Carefully navigating past these nauseating corpses, Qin Muyang continued his advance toward the hospital's side entrance. He did not let his guard down. Instead, he became even more vigilant. Having just passed the morgue without incident felt surreal, leaving him unsettled. When things are too quiet, trouble. As expected, after advancing another 10 meters or so, the stray dog that had slinked away earlier returned. And this time it was accompanied by over a dozen gaunt, mangy mutts with vicious glints in their eyes. Generally, Chinese rural dogs are known for their loyalty and good nature. However, these dogs had likely been strays since birth, never knowing a full belly and constantly chased away by humans, breeding a deep-seated animosity. Upon spotting Qin Muyang, the entire pack bared their teeth and emitted low guttural growls. Qin Muyang was rendered speechless. "You're an unscrupulous dog going back to call for reinforcements." Qin Muyang positioned the iron rod horizontally across his chest, adopting a stance that allowed for swift attacks and defenses, his eyes fixed intently on the approaching pack of dogs. The pack of dogs was also testing the waters, not daring to charge directly. After all, dogs were merely dogs, not intelligent enough, not disciplined enough. The pack merely growled lowly at Qin Muyang, too afraid to lunge forward. Two of them even tucked their tails between their hind legs, while growling stealthily backing away. Seeing that the pack was somewhat cowardly, Qin Muyang's confidence swelled. He brandished the iron rod and began to drive them away. As expected, the moment the iron rod moved, the dogs either cowered on the ground or retreated with their tails between their legs. Only a few appeared unafraid of Qin Muyang. Those few dogs happened to be the skinniest. Driven mad by hunger, their desire for food overrode all fear, rendering them unafraid of the iron rod in Qin Muyang's hand. But with only a handful of dogs like this, Qin Muyang found them unproblematic. No matter how ferocious they seemed, it was clear they lacked any organization or strategy, making them easy to pick off one by one. With that thought, Qin Muyang swung the iron rod directly at the head of the leading black dog. The rod whistled through the air as it met the lunging canine. A dull thud rang out as the iron rod struck true, sending the black dog flying 2 meters away. It landed with a puff of dust, whimpered twice, kicked its hind legs several times, and then fell still. Seeing this, the remaining dogs either turned tail and fled or bared their teeth and charged. Qin Muyang wielded the iron rod, striking, bashing, or thrusting diagonally. In less than 2 minutes, several dogs lay on the ground whimpering in pain. The rest, thoroughly terrified, fled with their tails between their legs, emitting low, mournful whines. He never expected the weapon he had meticulously crafted for fighting zombies would first be used against a pack of Qin Muyang casually wiped the iron rod on the grass beside him and continued heading toward the side gate. Unexpectedly, the dogs, having run far away, suddenly turned back and lunged straight at Qin Muyang, their movements swifter and more ferocious than before. Strangely, as they charged, the dogs whimpered softly, as if gripped by immense terror. Qin Muyang's heart skipped a beat. He realized the dogs weren't chasing him. They had encountered something on their path and were forced to turn back. What could scare dogs to such an extent? It certainly wasn't his figure wielding the iron rod. Qin Muyang already had an answer. As expected, in the distant sunlight, several staggering figures emerged. Their stiff bodies, twisted gaits, and thick stench of decay told Qin Muyang he had finally encountered living zombies. And there were several of them at once. Facing so many zombies, all the techniques and maneuvers he had envisioned in the hospital room vanished from his mind in an instant. Only one thought remained: run. Run faster than these dogs. If even they feared zombies, what chance did a lone human like him have? When he saw zombies on the screen, he had imagined countless times how he would deal with them, believing he would outshine any protagonist. But facing them in reality, he could only feel that bone-chilling terror. These were truly emotionless beasts. No, worse than beasts. Beasts knew fear, as zombies did not. Zombies only advanced endlessly forward. Feed. They would only stop when their skulls were pierced and all life was extinguished. Staring at those cloudy, pupilless gray eyes, the pallid skin, and the mechanical throat emitting hoarse gasps, Qin Muyang's legs moved swiftly. The dogs also fled alongside Qin Muyang, but prolonged hunger had weakened them, and they gradually fell behind. Soon Qin Muyang heard the mournful cries of a dog behind him. He couldn't help but look back just in time to see a zombie grab a dog and tear at it fiercely. The fetid mouth opened wide and bit directly into the dog's neck. Instantly, blood seeped through the zombie's teeth, dripping onto the ground. More zombies caught up and crowded around, their cyan-gray hands clawing and tearing at the dog. Before long, the barking faded, replaced by labored breathing. After a few more seconds, even the breathing ceased. The dog had been disemboweled by the zombies, its intestines and entrails dragged out. Blood stained the ground, and the stench of gore mixed with the zombies' decay wafted over on the summer breeze. Qin Muyang's stomach churned, he gagged and dry-heaved twice. Several zombies stayed to feast on the dog's corpse while new ones continued to pursue. Qin Muyang did not linger and ran on. Behind him, the occasional howl of a dog reached his ears, and the wind carried the scent of blood. As he ran, a chill crept over his scalp. How could this be happening in real life? Qin Muyang still felt it all seemed unreal. But the creatures chasing him were no illusion. He could only grit his teeth and flee. At first, his stamina held out, but the zombies behind him kept pursuing relentlessly. Though their pace was slow, almost unhurried, Qin Muyang's speed gradually waned. Still a convalescent, he had been running for too long. Now he could barely manage a jog, forced to walk quickly while gasping for breath. Moreover, Qin Muyang realized he had deviated from his planned route during the escape. Truly, plans changed more often than not. He couldn't force his way back to the original path, as the hospital was vast and unfamiliar to him, and some roads were blocked by zombies. Seeing Qin Muyang pass by, those zombies quickly joined the chase. Now 20 or 30 zombies followed him, and the number kept growing. Looking out from the hospital room earlier, he couldn't see where the zombies were hiding. At night, without light, he only heard their roars and various sounds, never glimpsing their true forms. Now Qin Muyang understood: during the day, the zombies lazily lurked in shadowy, places waiting for prey to appear before giving chase. He dodged zombies that might suddenly emerge at any moment while searching for a way forward. No matter what, he had to leave this hospital. Baishan City's Second People's Hospital was a large general hospital covering tens of thousands of square meters. Countless patients and medical staff were inside now, either evacuated or turned into zombies. Except for a few entrances and exits, the entire hospital was surrounded by walls 1 to 2 meters high. Qin Muyang knew that trapped inside the hospital his situation would only worsen, so he had no choice but to run toward the walls. Following the wall, he would surely find an exit. The sun had climbed high and the air was growing thick with heat. The meager breakfast Qin Muyang had eaten that morning had long since been digested, leaving his lips parched and cracked. He desperately needed to stop, rest, and replenish himself with food and water. Yet his current predicament forbade him from halting, and he had no provisions to consume. His earlier assumption that he could quickly find food and water in a street-side shop after leaving the hospital now seemed utterly delusional. At this moment, simply escaping the clutches of these pursuing zombies would be enough for Qin Muyang. Turning down a tree-lined path, he looked up and saw rows upon rows of people standing ahead on the road, and an immediate sense of oppression washed over him. They were all wearing the same hospital gowns as him, standing motionless with a manic stillness. The noise Qin Muyang made drew their attention, and in an instant the entire crowd turned their heads as one. And so Qin Muyang witnessed the most terrifying scene of his life. Every face that turned was a ghastly ashen gray with murky eyes, and a great many bore various horrific wounds. Some had a deep blackish-blue bite mark on their cheek. Others had half their face torn away, revealing the bone beneath with maggots crawling in and out. Still others had an eyeball hanging out, connected only by a thin thread dangling and swaying. There were even those with no face left at all, nothing but a skull-like head with 2 deep black eye sockets that would give anyone nightmares just by looking at them. So many horrifying faces staring at him sent a shiver down Qin Muyang's spine, and goosebumps erupted across his skin in an instant. These were no fellow patients, they were clearly a horde of zombies. Qin Muyang was utterly petrified. With roars and guttural sounds, the zombies let out excited noises and lunged towards him. These zombies hadn't seen fresh flesh and blood in a long time. The sudden appearance of a living, breathing human instantly awakened their innate savagery and bloodlust. Cursing under his breath, Qin Muyang dragged his exhausted body around a sharp corner and leaped into a green belt to flee, finally escaping the predicament of having predators ahead and pursuers behind. But the two groups of zombies merged into one large horde, relentlessly chasing him from behind. And because of their sheer numbers, the noise they made grew louder, attracting many more scattered zombies from the vicinity. This made Qin Muyang's escape increasingly difficult. The vegetation in the green belt was lush in this season, with tall and short plants all thick and verdant, nearly tripping him. Several times he stumbled, but quickly regained his footing. This was thanks to his advantage as a sports student. His balance was better than an average person's, and it was proving to be a lifesaver. If he accidentally fell in this green belt, the zombies behind would soon catch up, and he would become a delicious takeout meal. These zombies usually wandered around searching for food. They had never seen a meal delivered right to them like Qin Muyang. But as time ticked by, Qin Muyang felt he was reaching his physical limits. The zombies behind clung closely, just a step away from him. Suddenly a zombie howled and lunged at Qin Muyang from a bush ahead. He sidestepped to avoid it, but the movement inevitably slowed him down, and the zombies behind immediately surged forward. Foremost among them were two patients in hospital gowns, their faces contorted with rage, making grating sounds as they rushed at Qin Muyang. A chill ran through Qin Muyang's heart, and for a moment he panicked, but he quickly composed himself. Someone like him, who often competed in sports, generally had a stronger mental fortitude. Though he might panic in an emergency, he could adjust his mindset in an instant. He ducked down slightly, then swiftly pulled out the pointed solid iron rod strapped to his waist. Gripping the iron rod with both hands, he thrust it forward towards the zombie's eye socket. He felt a satisfying sensation of penetration as the rod plunged deep into the socket. With a squelching sound of flesh being pierced, thick, filthy fluid oozed out along the iron rod. This was the feeling of killing a zombie, a scene from the movies, the thrill many fantasized about. The zombie instantly lost its vitality and collapsed onto the grass with a thud. Qin Muyang quickly withdrew the iron rod and thrust it out again. Since the two zombies had charged in succession, he had no time to aim for the second one after killing the first. This time he didn't hit the eye socket, but instead struck the zombie's cheek. The sensation wasn't as satisfying as before. The jarring impact made Qin Muyang step back, nearly falling to the ground. The zombies roared and surged forward relentlessly. Qin Muyang immediately pulled back the rod and thrust again. This time, he accurately drove the pointed tip into the zombie's eye socket. Another squelch and viscous fluid spurted out, utterly disgusting. Qin Muyang dared not linger and quickly pulled out the rod. Unsure if contact with the mucus would infect him with the zombie virus, Qin Muyang wiped the rod clean. He tucked the rod back into his waist, and his feet were already moving swiftly. Escape. He had to escape. If he couldn't shake off these zombies, running until he dropped would be useless. Looking up, he saw the hospital's inpatient building ahead. He had just left from there this morning, run a full circle, and now found himself back near it. But Qin Muyang knew he absolutely could not hide inside the inpatient building. Not only were the restless zombies inside a huge, unstable factor, but he also faced the threat of having no food or water. Therefore, even if the building were empty of zombies hiding, there wouldn't be a long-term solution. He still needed to leave and search for supplies. The large horde of zombies behind was in hot pursuit, and Qin Muyang gasped for breath as he pressed on. After rounding the inpatient building, the number of zombies behind him had increased even more. Who starts a game on hell difficulty? Qin Muyang felt he was a bit unlucky. If this continued, and he couldn't find a way to successfully escape the hospital, he would surely meet his end. I can't die like this. That would be too unjust. Qin Muyang encouraged himself as he ran. After studying hard for over a decade, I've only enjoyed 1 year of college life. I haven't even started working to ease my parents' burden. Dying now would be so unfortunate. The thought of his parents ignited a new surge of strength within Qin Muyang, allowing him to put several more meters between himself and the pursuing zombies. He wasn't thinking about how he could repay his parents if he died. Instead, he considered that judging by the current situation, the zombie virus had likely overrun many cities, and he wondered how his parents were faring. No matter what, he had to survive and see his parents. Even if they had turned into zombies, he had to see them alive or find their bodies. No, they wouldn't become zombies. They lived in the countryside, sparsely populated. They wouldn't turn. Qin Muyang pondered this as he looked up. Ahead stood a few medium-sized ornamental trees, and behind them was the hospital's perimeter wall. Qin Muyang was not surprised by the towering wall, though instead he felt a sense of relief. He had not stumbled into this dead end in panic, but had originally planned to find a wall suitable for climbing. This place was just right. The natural ornamental tree could bear a person's weight. He could climb it, use the branch leaning against the wall to leap onto the wall, and then leave the hospital. This was far safer than using the main or side gates of the hospital, as it would avoid being chased by zombies. He had observed that these zombies could not perform difficult actions like climbing trees. Leaving the hospital from here would allow him to shake off the horde behind him. In a flash, Qin Muyang reached the ornamental tree. He turned to look at the dense mass of zombies behind him, no less than 80 if not 100. If he were caught by this horde, he would likely be torn to shreds, not even having a chance to become a zombie. Who has ever seen minced meat turn into a zombie? Qin Muyang quickly began climbing the tree. As a child in the countryside, he had often been beaten for climbing trees, but that never stopped him from clambering up to pick fruit or raid beehives. It was fortunate that he hadn't been discouraged by the beatings back then, otherwise he would never have developed this incredible climbing skill. In a few swift moves, Qin Muyang was up among the branches. Below the tree, zombies had already gathered. Having lost the ability to climb, they could only circle the trunk and howl in frustration. As they jostled and crowded, the tree shook violently. The rustling leaves attracted more zombies, who pushed and rammed the tree with increasing ferocity. Qin Muyang nearly lost his grip, breaking out in a cold sweat. Falling into the zombie mob below would mean certain death without a complete body. He quickly crawled toward the branch pressed against the wall and shifted himself onto the wall. Standing on the solid brickwork, he finally breathed a sigh of relief, feeling he was saved. At least he no longer had to play a tortuous game of hide-and-seek with these zombies outside. That desperate, exhausting feeling had kept his nerves taut, like a slow death by 1,000 cuts. The zombies were still frenziedly attacking the tree below, seemingly unaware that their prey had already jumped onto the wall. Qin Muyang didn't rush. He caught his breath on the wall, resting for 5 or 6 minutes before beginning to survey the situation outside. Parting the dense leaves, he looked out to see a quiet alley. One side bordered the hospital wall, the other was lined with small breakfast eateries and shabby inns. All these eateries had their doors wide open, with tables and chairs scattered haphazardly on the floor. Dried bloodstains could be seen on the floors and walls, and even the road outside was splattered with blood. It was hard to imagine what had happened in this alley. Whatever it was, it must have been a horrific scene. Qin Muyang observed that there were no zombies in the alley, so he slowly crouched down, carefully leaped from the wall, and landed in the lane. Through the wall, he could still hear the various sounds made by the zombies inside. Qin Muyang shook his head, leaving those noises behind. The alley was filled with the same putrid smell as the hospital, though not as strong. Qin Muyang frowned and headed straight for the eateries. He planned to search for food and water. These small restaurants usually had glass bottled drinks on the tables for sale, and those bottled beverages were his target. But his expectations were dashed. Not a single table or chair in the small eatery was upright. They were all scattered and overturned. The glass bottled drinks had fallen and shattered, their contents long since spilled, and drained away. The spilled drinks had dried on the floor, leaving only sugary residue that stuck noisily to his soles. Many ants and small insects were trapped in the dried sugar, forming dark patches on the ground. These patches intermingled with dried bloodstains, creating a nauseating mosaic on the floor. There were even more disgusting sights that Qin Muyang simply pretended not to see. He searched through the chaos for anything useful, but too much time had passed. These cramped shops had never held much to begin with, and after the frantic looting and fleeing, even less remained. Qin Muyang had hoped to find a knife as a backup weapon, but after checking several shops, he found none. Even though these were small restaurants, they should have had at least a kitchen knife. So the conclusion was obvious: someone had taken the knives. Perhaps during the zombie outbreak, someone had grabbed a cleaver and rushed out. Or perhaps someone had already scavenged the area after the outbreak. There were no corpses or zombies in this alley, otherwise Qin Muyang might have been able to scavenge something. He walked through several more eateries, all of which were the same tables and chairs strewn about floors covered in blood and beverage stains. Just as he was about to leave the alley, he found a surviving bottle of juice in the third-to-last shop. Under normal circumstances, Qin Muyang would not have given this kind of juice a second glance. It was nothing but artificial colors, flavors, and sugar with no real fruit content. But at this moment, that bottle of concocted juice seemed like the elixir of immortality. He longed to pour it. He placed the bottle cap against the edge of an overturned small square table and slapped it down, sending the cap popping off and rolling onto the floor. Qin Muyang raised the glass bottle to his lips and gulped it down in one go, finishing the entire 500-milliliter bottle in a single session. After finishing the juice, Qin Muyang still felt thirsty, but he was better off than before. The high sugar content also provided some energy. He grabbed a small stool and sat down, planning to rest a while before moving on. Just then he felt a dull ache at the back of his head and a wave of dizziness. Probably from all the exertion of fleeing. This amount of exercise was nothing to him in the past, but now, while still recovering, it was a heavy burden. After sitting for over 10 minutes, Qin Muyang finally felt some relief. Next, he planned to leave the alley and see what the main street looked like. A single bottle of juice was not enough. The weather was too hot. He needed to replenish a lot of water and find food to fill his stomach. It was already nearing noon, and soon it would be the hottest part of the day. He needed to find food and water and rest in a more comfortable place to avoid the midday heat. With that thought, Qin Muyang stood up and walked toward the mouth of the alley. He was unfamiliar with this neighborhood. He had no idea which main street lay ahead or what sights awaited him. He would just have to see as he went. Having studied in Beishan City for a year from south to north, the only area he knew well was the district where his school was located. But Beishan City had 5 districts. It was a big city. As for the district he was in now, he only came here when playing basketball with students from Petroleum University. He was utterly clueless about this place. First find food and water, then get a more detailed map. Qin Muyang planned as he walked. Lifting his head, he realized he had already emerged from the alley and stepped onto the broad street outside. The scene on the street was even more horrifying. Under the blindingly white sunlight, he could see vehicles colliding everywhere, nearly blocking the entire road. The collisions had likely sparked fires, leaving traces of scorch and smoke stains. On the ground, charred corpses piled up, emitting a nauseating blend of burnt and decaying odors. Qin Muyang tightened the cloth over his nose and mouth, though he knew it was futile. The smell still seeped through, and the bacteria would still infiltrate through the gaps in the fabric. Ever since middle school, when his teacher explained that molecules are in constant motion, Qin Muyang understood that smelling something meant inhaling its molecules. If you smell feces, then the fecal molecules have already entered your nose, he mused. He averted his gaze from the corpses and looked elsewhere. By the roadside, piles of garbage accumulated with shards of glass gleaming sharply in the light. These were the remnants of people's wanton looting and destruction. One could imagine how turbulent the city had been back then. People were frantically celebrating the apocalypse, doing things they had always wanted but never dared to. The kind cautious or timid hid behind windows, watching the city crumble. In Qin Muyang's mind, images of hordes of zombies, panicked crowds, and the figures of rioters and looters surfaced. He could almost hear screams, cries, roars, zombie howls, inexplicable laughter, and calm, commanding voices directing people on how to flee. Qin Muyang sighed. His hearing and smell were exceptionally sharp, and occasionally, based on these sensations, his mind would automatically conjure up a plausible scene. Though not an exact replica of the past, it was often 70 to 80% accurate. Sometimes he despised this talent, as it exposed him to dark and terrifying visions. He had heard this was a natural profiling ability, but Qin Muyang didn't dwell on it. In reality, many people possessed such a skill, even applying it in their work. Like a writer's sensitivity when capturing inspiration or a detective's vigilance at a crime scene. Qin Muyang had no intention of developing this ability. He just wanted to live a simple life. His dream was to graduate from college, return to his hometown, and become a physical education teacher. A simple, stable life that would ease his parents' worries. That was why he had majored in physical education. Now looking at the scene before him, that dream seemed impossible. An eerie silence surrounded him. Qin Muyang had never heard the city so quiet. Every time he went out, it was either the roar of traffic or the clamor of crowds. This silence, like the calm before a storm, made his heart pound uncontrollably. The quieter it was, the more ominous the street felt. Either all living things on this street had perished, or something lurked in the shadows, deliberately keeping silent. He had to leave this street quickly. Qin Muyang quickened his pace, his footsteps rustling against the ground. He tried to move swiftly, yet lightly, minimizing noise. In such a silent environment, anyone who made a sound became a target. The street was lined with large hotels offering premium accommodation, a stark contrast to the alley he had just left. Patients visiting a major hospital like Beishan's Second People's Hospital fell into two groups: the wealthy, who demanded the best in food and lodging even for medical treatment and would stay on this street. The other group were the poor with serious illnesses who had spent everything to come to the big hospital and could only afford cramped, filthy alleyways. Qin Muyang was an exception. Based on his experience, he had likely collapsed on the basketball court and been rushed to the Second People's Hospital by ambulance. Looking at the upscale hotels by the roadside, he knew he couldn't enter them to search for supplies. The hotel doors were all wide open, revealing spacious lobbies. If zombies were inside, there would be a massive number of them. Without lights, the hotel lobbies were pitch black. Qin Muyang wasn't willing to risk it for food. Hotels like these might have food, but most of it would be pre-packaged or fresh produce. With the power outage lasting so long, the food had likely rotted, making it hard to find anything intact. Convenience stores or supermarkets were more likely to have food and water than hotels or restaurants. However, he had to stick to smaller shops. Larger spaces with abundant goods meant larger crowds, which in turn meant more zombies. So Qin Muyang focused only on small stores. But this street had no such small shops, and the overwhelming silence made him increasingly anxious. It was already noon. The scorching sun beat down on him. He was drenched in sweat, his hospital gown clinging to his skin, and his vision began to blur. He was still too weak. The chaotic debris on the street made it difficult for him to move forward. He struggled through several burnt-out car frames and picked his way among charred corpses, searching for footholds. Then he noticed a protruding awning not far ahead, likely from a coffee shop. Beneath it lay a few overturned high-backed chairs. Drawing closer, he saw it was indeed a cafe with large floor-to-ceiling windows. He dared not enter the shops to escape the blazing noon sun, but the awning on the roadside offered a place to rest. Qin Muyang quickly moved under the awning, picked up a chair, and sat down. Though the air remained stifling, his exposed skin no longer felt the searing pain and heat. But before he could catch his breath, he caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye through the cafe's glass window. The motion was subtle, yet it sent a chill down his spine. He slowly turned his head and saw that the cafe was packed with zombies, at least 20 or 30 of them. The zombies stood motionless inside, moving at an agonizingly slow pace, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. A buzz went through Qin Muyang's mind. He thanked his luck that the zombies hadn't spotted him. He stood up, gently preparing to leave the cafe entrance. As if driven by some impulse, he carefully scrutinized all the storefronts along the street. Through the glass, he could clearly see that nearly every shop was densely packed with zombies. Fortunately, he had been treading lightly the entire way, making no significant noise. He had always been. The zombies stood motionless, their bodies swaying slightly, making no major movements. It seemed they disliked the intense sunlight and had retreated indoors to slumber. Qin Muyang suddenly recalled some information he had previously overlooked. When he woke up in the hospital yesterday, looking out the ward window revealed nothing, and it was not until near dusk that the zombies slowly began to stir. Moreover, the chase by zombies in the hospital this morning had been triggered by his own disturbance of those lurking in the shade. He had overlooked such crucial information in his flight. The eerie silence of the empty streets was not due to the absence of life, but precisely because there were so many zombies all crammed into the shops lining the roads, creating this deathly stillness. For any sound would cause the zombies on both sides to surge forth madly, quickly flooding the street. Even a mouse would struggle to break through such an encirclement. Perhaps from behind the curtains of a hotel room upstairs, someone was watching Qin Muyang cross the street, unable to utter a sound to warn him that this road, though seemingly calm, was fraught with peril. It was no wonder Qin Muyang had walked so far without noticing the zombies behind the glass. First, the glass was somewhat reflective. After seeing that the shop signs were not small supermarkets or convenience stores, he did not bother to scrutinize the interiors through the glass. Second, walking under the blazing sun, his eyes were dazzled by the intense light, making it impossible to see clearly into the shaded shops on either side. When a person moves from a brightly lit environment into a relatively dim indoor space, they experience a brief moment of blindness before their vision gradually recovers. It takes several minutes to see clearly again. Qin Muyang had only noticed the zombies behind the cafe's glass window because he had rested briefly in the shade of an awning, allowing his vision to recover somewhat. When he stepped back into the harsh light, he couldn't help but squint. Soon, however, he adapted again to the sun's fierce glare and continued trudging forward under the heat. This time, he moved with even greater caution than before, terrified of disturbing any zombie hiding in the roadside shops. Disturbing one would surely trigger a chain reaction, leaving him with no escape. His eyes, again blinded by the dazzling sun, could no longer make out the scenes inside the shops, and Qin Muyang gradually relaxed. Perhaps the saying "out of sight, out of mind" held true. After more than 10 minutes, Qin Muyang finally reached a crossroads. Gazing around, the city lay in ruins. The street ahead looked no different from the one he had just traversed, not a soul in sight. The zombies were still hidden in the shops on both sides. But the two streets intersecting left and right presented a different scene. These streets were in the shade without the glaring sun. Small groups of zombies could be seen wandering aimlessly, emitting low growls from their throats. At this moment, Qin Muyang was immensely grateful for the pile of crashed cars at the intersection. The sheer number of wrecked vehicles at the crossroads had completely blocked the streets, preventing the wandering zombies from the side streets from reaching the intersection. Otherwise, any sound from these zombies at the junction could have alarmed those hiding in the shops along the vertical street. That would have put Qin Muyang in grave danger. Suppressing any unnecessary noise, he quickly scrambled over several wrecked cars. Crack! His foot struck some car part, producing a sharp snapping sound. Off balance, Qin Muyang lunged forward but caught himself with his hands. He nearly landed face first on the scrap metal. He thought, close call. That protruding piece of metal could have scarred my face. Suddenly, a pair of murky eyes emerged from the pile of metal. As their gazes met, Qin Muyang realized it was a zombie trapped among the cars, about to unleash its signature roar and attack. Sweat beaded on Qin Muyang's forehead. He reached behind his back, pulled out the iron rod made from a forestand, and thrust it directly into the zombie's murky eye. Mucus spurted out like a burst water balloon. The zombie instantly fell silent. Though the commotion was minimal, it attracted another wandering zombie nearby. Qin Muyang withdrew the rod and thrust again in one fluid motion, felling another zombie. He even caught the corpse with his hand, lowering it slowly to the ground without a sound. This time, no other zombies were alerted. Having killed before, he found himself calmer than ever. A stabbing with the iron rod felt almost like piercing a watermelon. Qin Muyang slowly emerged from the wreckage of cars and continued along the street. In the shops on both sides, hordes of zombies slumbered, waiting for nightfall or a sound to awaken them. The sun still blazed overhead, and he was nearing his limit. Dehydrated, hungry, and physically weak from constant movement, without rest, Qin Muyang felt he could collapse at any moment, his bodis energy steadily draining. If not for the fear that the iron rod scraping the ground would make a sharp noise, he would have used it as a walking stick. If he were to face a situation like being chased by a horde of zombies from the hospital again, Qin Muyang was certain he wouldn't even make it 100 meters before being caught. He might even suffer a sudden heart attack and drop dead on the spot. In zombie movies and novels, the protagonists are always robust and formidable, capable of running marathon distances without panting, unstoppable even when injured. How is it that in his case, merely climbing out of the hospital and walking 2 streets felt like he was about to drop dead? It seems fiction is unreliable, only practice yields true knowledge. Fortunately, this stretch of road was like the previous one. No zombies roamed outside. As long as he kept quiet and maintained his composure, he could pass safely. Qin Muyang only needed to expend the effort to walk forward, using his eyes to find a suitable place to rest or scavenge supplies without having to contend with more zombies. After much effort, he passed a convenience store, but its door was completely missing. The shelves inside were toppled in chaos, and all the goods had long been looted clean. Moreover, several zombies were trapped inside. Even if some items had slipped through the cracks, Qin Muyang dared not risk entering to search. His stamina could no longer sustain a confrontation with so many zombies. Forcing himself forward a bit more, Qin Muyang could walk no further. He desperately needed to stop and rest. His lips were cracked and peeling with blood oozing from the fissures. He wiped the blood clean with the towel covering his mouth and nose, hoping the scent wouldn't attract the zombies. His breathing grew heavy and labored, as if he had just sprinted 100 meters, even though his pace was slow. Black spots began to appear before his eyes, a sign of impending collapse. Can't fall asleep, can't fall asleep. Qin Muyang murmured to himself, trying to stay awake. He knew that if he collapsed here, even if the zombies didn't devour him, the scorching sun would leave him dehydrated. The images from videos of those who got lost in the wilderness and were roasted into charred corpses under the sun were no laughing matter. Fortunately, fate seemed to favor him, as he immediately spotted a small supermarket at the intersection ahead. Though the storefront was only about 6 or 7 meters wide, its glass doors were intact and shelves inside were stocked with goods. His eyes locked onto the cooler near the entrance filled with drinks and bottled water. Qin Muyang's throat bobbed violently as he fought the urge to dash in and guzzle down every bottle. But his dwindling rationality held him back. He noticed several zombies inside the store. This time he couldn't ignore them, he had to find a way to eliminate them and get inside. Qin Muyang surveyed the surroundings. On one side of the small supermarket was a hot pot restaurant with its glass doors shattered into fragments scattered everywhere. The interior was pitch black, but without the stench of rotting flesh, suggesting few zombies lurked within. On the other side was a tobacco and liquor shop about 2 meters wide. The shelves had been mostly looted and a half-rotted corpse lay behind the counter. This shop marked the end of the street leading to a crossroads. Qin Muyang didn't dwell on the scene inside, his throat tightening with tension. Overall, the areas flanking the unremarkable supermarket were relatively safe, giving Qin Muyang room to deal with the zombies inside. Charging in blindly would be foolish. If the zombies swarmed him, he'd have no chance of survival. After a moment's thought, a plan began to form in his mind. He pulled down the towel covering his mouth and nose, tore a piece of cloth from his clothes, and dabbed it on his lips. Seeing a small bloodstain appear on the fabric, he tucked it away and pulled the towel back up. He prayed this tiny bloodstain would do the trick, otherwise he'd have to lure the zombies with noise, a move that would put him in grave danger. Gripping the pointed iron rod in his right hand ready for any attack, Qin Muyang placed the bloodstained cloth on the rod's tip. With his left hand, he slid open the supermarket's glass door. The door opened smoothly without a sound. He extended the iron rod with the cloth into the store, gently shaking it, then waited in silence. After about 10 seconds, a zombie caught the faint scent of blood and staggered toward the entrance. A low growl rumbled from its throat as its jaws snapped ready to tear. But as it neared the door, the iron rod mercilessly pierced its skull. A wet, sickening thud followed. Qin Muyang had grown accustomed to the sensation of the rod tearing through flesh, the fear and tension from his first zombie kill earlier that morning now a distant memory. He adapted quickly, knowing his life depended on it, with no time for sentimentality. Besides, weakened and exhausted, he just wanted to finish off these zombies, grab some food and drink from the store, and rest. Had he not been so frail, Qin Muyang was certain he could have stormed the store and taken down these zombies and set. The first zombie fell at the entrance with a sound loud enough to alert the 2 others inside. They roared and lunged toward the door. After Qin Muyang stabbed down another zombie, the remaining one charged at his face. With no time to pull out the rod for another strike, he kicked out fiercely at the zombie's chest. He underestimated his current weakness. The kick felt like hitting a concrete block, and he stumbled backward. The zombie lunged, crashing onto him as they both hit the ground. A sharp pain exploded at the back of his skull. Qin Muyang wanted to curse. The zombie pressed on his chest, its gaping mouth snapping toward his face. The iron rod had slipped from his grasp, leaving him weaponless. A shadow of impending death loomed over him. In desperation, he yanked down the towel covering his face and flung it over the zombie's head. Though a towel couldn't harm the zombie or suffocate it, it securely covered its foul-reeking mouth, preventing it. With its mouth muffled, the zombie's claws flailed wildly. Qin Muyang recalled the 3 unbreakable rules, had formulated one of which was that bites or scratches could infect him with the zombie virus. He twisted his body to avoid the zombie's grasping hands while groping blindly on the ground. Finally, his hand found a glass bottle of drink near the door. Gripping its neck, he smashed the bottom against the floor, then drove the jagged edge into the zombie's skull. Once, twice, 3 times. 4 times. His hand moved like a motor, and he lost count of how many times he struck until the zombie went still. He dropped the broken bottle and stepped back. Pushing aside the zombie with its mangled head, Qin Muyang stood up and straightened his clothes. His hospital gown was filthy, but with no change of clothes in sight, he had to keep wearing it. Still, he added finding fresh clothes to his mental checklist for future scavenging. The scuffle hadn't been as quiet as had hoped, but since the bottle breaking occurred inside the store, the noise didn't carry far, so he wasn't worried about attracting more zombies from the area. Besides, the tobacco shop next door had no zombies, and the hot pot restaurant seemed to have few as well. Glancing at the 3 corpses on the floor, Qin Muyang calmly walked to the drinks aisle. He grabbed a 1-liter bottle of water, opened it, rinsed his hands, and splashed his face before gulping it down. After several large swallows, he remembered a lesson had learned: when severely dehydrated, drinking too fast or too much at once could cause water poisoning. He stopped chugging and instead took a mouthful, letting it slide down slowly. Then he found a chocolate bar on the shelf, tore open the wrapper, and devoured it in 2 bites. He grabbed another. Ordinarily, he'd never splurge on such expensive chocolate. A small bar cost over 10 yuan, but now he ate without a care. Free shopping felt incredible. He couldn't resist grabbing another bar and finishing it. After a voracious feast, Qin Muyang's earlier hunger and thirst were alleviated, and he paused. If he continued to indulge recklessly, it might cause physical discomfort, so he decided to take it slow. The chocolate was high in energy, and within minutes Qin Muyang felt his strength seemingly restored. He walked to the door, dragging the 3 corpses that lay at the entrance out onto the street outside, thereby significantly reducing the stench inside the supermarket. Finding a small plastic stool, he sat for a while, then rose again to eat and drink. This time, without restraint, he ate and drank his fill. He had intended to search the store for needed and portable supplies after eating, but the wounds from his earlier fall suddenly throbbed with intense pain. New injuries compounded the old, forcing Qin Muyang to sit down and rest again. Perhaps because his body had weathered the ordeal of food and water scarcity, all the wounds from the fight began to ache at once. For instance, the fall had bruised his spine, now sore and painful. Though the pain was bearable, it still vexed him. Moreover, a spot on his waist felt numb. Not recalling any injury there, Qin Muyang directly lifted his clothes to check. Upon lifting his shirt, he immediately noticed a distinct red fingerprint on his waist. Fortunately, it was just a mark with no wound or broken skin. This must have been a scratch from a zombie's grasping hand through his clothes when he fell. Thank goodness the hospital gown was thick and durable, otherwise the zombie might have torn through it. Had that happened, Qin Muyang might have already joined the ranks of the undead. After sitting to rest for a while, Qin Muyang suddenly heard the sound of fingernails scraping the floor behind him. He shuddered, grabbed the iron rod beside him, and turned around. In the aisle between the shelves behind him, a zombie was slowly crawling, using its hands to drag itself along the ground. The scraping sound originated from there. Qin Muyang stood up and observed carefully, discovering that the zombie's throat had been bitten through, preventing it from making the signature zombie sounds. Its lower body was missing, with intestines trailing behind, forcing it to crawl. At this sight, the food he had just eaten nearly came back up. After mentally preparing himself, Qin Muyang stepped forward and pierced the zombie's skull in one strike. The zombie carried a bulging black backpack on its back, seemingly filled with many items. This backpack is good, I can use it to carry supplies. Qin Muyang crouched down and removed the backpack from the zombie. He had been carrying a makeshift bag made from a pillowcase and was worrying about how to transport all the supermarket goods. It was as if a pillow had arrived just as he felt drowsy. Opening the backpack, he found it stuffed with a lot of loose change, likely money from customers paying for purchases with many 1-5 and 10 yuan notes. Besides the change, there was a key, several bottles of water, some food, a pack of tissues, 2 packs of cigarettes, a windproof lighter, and other odds and ends. Clearly, this was a decent emergency backpack. Unfortunately, its owner had not survived. Following the trail left by the backpack owner's crawling, Qin Muyang ventured deeper into the supermarket. Inside, there was a small restroom where he saw the lower half of a body, 2 semi-rotted legs. A vivid image instantly formed in his mind. During normal business hours, a customer in the supermarket had turned into a zombie and bitten others. The supermarket owner, backpack on, fled into the restroom, but was bitten on the throat before he could close the door. The zombie then feasted on his body from the waist, slowly devouring him in half until he finally died in the restroom. Since the brain remained intact, even half of his body eventually reanimated as a zombie. Among the 3 zombies he had just killed, one must have been the culprit that killed the owner. Perhaps all 3 were. This would also explain why the backpack was filled with cash. The key inside likely belonged to this very supermarket. Of course, one would bring all the hard-earned money when fleeing for one's life. Qin Muyang retreated from the restroom to the shelves, took the key from the backpack, and locked the supermarket door from the inside to prevent any zombies from accidentally pushing their way in. He planned to rest well in the supermarket. The golden sunlight outside blazed brightly, making it unsuitable for outdoor activities as it might lead to heat stroke. He hadn't yet decided on his next move, and his body needed recovery. There was no reason to leave the hard-found soup. Throughout his journey, only this place offered ample food and water, and aside from one toppled shelf, everything else was well preserved. Qin Muyang found some cardboard boxes in the corner, tore them open, and spread them on the floor to make a simple bed. Untying the cloth strips that bound his sleeves tight to his arms, and removing his foul, dirty shirt, he lay down directly. As soon as he lay down, the stench from the hospital gown placed nearby stung his eyes. He sat up again, found a large bottle of mineral water, rinsed the shirt clean, and hung it on a shelf. With the hot weather, the shirt would surely dry quickly. He also dragged the upper half zombie into the restroom to reunite it with its lower half. After finishing these tasks, he lay down again. His head throbbed, and amidst dizziness, exhaustion surged over him like a tide. Qin Muyang drank half a bottle of mineral water, and in the contentment of a full stomach drifted into slumber. His dreams were filled with scenes of fighting zombies, being bitten on the back of the head, and fleeing endlessly from them. He didn't know how long he had slept when he suddenly jolted awake. Perhaps his subconscious knew the supermarket wasn't entirely safe, prompting the abrupt awakening. Through the glass window, the sun was still blazing, reflecting off the street. It would be a long time until dusk. Despite having rested, he still felt exhausted, as if he could sleep until the end of time. Stretching as he stood up, he heard his stomach growl, loudly, clearly hungry again. Qin Muyang walked toward the shelves to pick out something to eat. As he moved, a sudden flash of insight struck him, and he froze in place. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. It was still early outside. He couldn't have slept long. So why was he so hungry? His throat was dry and swallowing felt obstructed and slightly painful. He had specifically drunk half a bottle of water before sleeping. He shouldn't be this thirsty. Such throat dryness and thirst only occur after being unconscious or asleep for over 4 hours without swallowing saliva. But if he had slept for over 4 hours, the sky outside wouldn't look like this. It should be dusk. Qin Muyang touched his chin and found stubble had grown. The fingerprint mark on his waist from the zombie's scratch had almost faded. So had he slept here for at least a day, or even longer? A chill ran down his spine. During the time he had been asleep, at least one night had passed. And at night the zombies lurking in the street-side shops would come out to roam. Qin Muyang secretly thanked his past self for locking the supermarket door with the key before falling asleep. Otherwise, wandering zombies might have broken in and bitten him in his slumber. He suspected that his ability to sleep for such a long stretch was related to the injury on the back of his head. He tried to recall. Before sleeping, he had only felt drowsy accompanied by dizziness and a headache, and then he had lost control and fallen asleep. Perhaps it wasn't that he couldn't control his urge to sleep, but rather that he couldn't stop himself from passing out. He couldn't stay here long. After all, the entire front of the store was made of glass, offering little in the way of security. If he fainted again, he might not be so fortunate. If the nocturnal zombies broke through these floor-to-ceiling windows, he could be devoured in an instant while unconscious. He had to leave this place immediately and find a more suitable hiding spot. Not only that, but he also needed to find like-minded companions he could trust with his back. In his current state, he was in no condition to survive alone. When he thought of teammates he could trust with his back, 3 names immediately surfaced in Qin Muyang's mind: Jiang Yuanfan, Gao Fei, and Lin Yu. These 3 were his dormitory roommates, all of them his closest. Jiang Yuanfan was his childhood neighbor. Though they weren't in the same major at university, fate had ironically placed them in the same dormitory to continue their bromance. As for Gao Fei and Lin Yu, they were his university classmates. Apart from singing, dancing, and playing basketball together, they sometimes strolled over to the nearby Normal University. As for why they insisted on going to that particular university, Qin Muyang believed it was something best left unspoken. Given that he could fall unconscious at any moment, these 3 were the only ones who would unconditionally help him in such a situation. This was something Qin Muyang was certain of. His friendship with Jiang Yuanfan needed no elaboration. They had swum together naked in the river as kids, each having saved the other's life several times. Gao Fei was from the northeast and shared a deep bond with Qin Muyang, the kind of person who would bare his soul without reservation. He was naive in that way. Good meant good, bad meant bad, and he never pretended or hid anything. Lin Yu was even more peculiar. Having suffered from school bullying in his middle school years, he had always been timid and self-conscious. When he first saw Qin Muyang in the dormitory on the first day of university, he was hesitant and fawning. But Qin Muyang smiled, shook his hand, spoke many kind words, and shared some local specialties with him. From that day on, Lin Yu was utterly devoted to him, leading everyone to suspect he was gay. In Qin Muyang's heart, he had merely done something ordinary, but in Lin Yu's eyes it was entirely different. It was the first time a classmate had treated him with such warmth. All in all, it was a remarkably harmonious dormitory. Without exaggeration, if war broke out, this dormitory would be an impenetrable fortress. In this world now overrun with zombies, Qin Muyang could only be at ease with them, knowing they would carry him out of danger if he collapsed amidst the horde. But how was he to find these 3 now? The summer break had just begun, and none of them had been in a hurry to go home. If this catastrophe hadn't struck, they would likely be at the internet cafe near the school or playing basketball against another school. Given the current situation, everything was uncertain. Qin Muyang could only hold on to the hope that they were still at school and decided to set his goal as returning there first. In such circumstances, the school would surely organize survival efforts for the students, wouldn't it? It couldn't possibly abandon so many lives. Regardless, he would head back to school first and see. Even if he couldn't find Jiang Yuanfan and the others, he might run into other alumni. Strangers outside might not help you, but fellow schoolmates would surely share some bond, wouldn't they? But getting back to school was no easy task. The area he was in now was over an hour away from Beishan University by bus, and Qin Muyang had no vehicle. Walking back on foot wasn't impossible, but he was unfamiliar with this area and didn't know the way. It looks like he'll need to find a detailed city map first. Qin Muyang planned as he walked toward the shelves to grab water and food. After filling his stomach, he began packing items into a black backpack. The backpack was just an ordinary one about the size of a school bag, not meant for outdoor use, with very limited. Since he didn't know how long it would take to reach the school, or if he could find more food along the way, he had to pack wisely, prioritizing food, water, and other essentials. He needed to be even more selective with his food choices, opting for items that were compact, high-calorie, and nutritious. Qin Muyang grabbed some authentic beef jerky, pure cocoa chocolate vitamin gummies, and a few packs of biscuits. The supermarket had originally stocked compressed biscuits, but after checking the ingredient list, he couldn't help but let out a wry laugh. These compressed biscuits were a complete scam. Their ingredients were more complicated than regular biscuits, full of chemicals and artificial additives, offering neither nutrition nor satiety compared to ordinary ones. They were outright fakes. He had wanted to grab some nutritious canned goods, but the cans were too bulky and heavy. In the end, he only packed 1 can of beef. As for water, regular bottled mineral water would do, and it had to be the small bottles. Large bottles were inconvenient to carry, unlike small ones which could be stacked with food like building blocks, and once opened, if not consumed quickly, they could breed bacteria. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't matter much, but now with medicine and medical supplies scarce, even a bout of diarrhea could be fatal. Everything had to be on the safe side. With food and water mostly prepared, Qin Muyang also grabbed 2 sun protective masks. Though they couldn't effectively block viruses, they could shield from the sun and filter out some odors. It was a shame the supermarket had no flashlights, meaning that if he couldn't find a suitable place to rest by nightfall, he would be left groping in the dark. In the corner lay a coil of rope, presumably used by the shopkeeper for bundling things. Qin Muyang tidied it up and stuffed it into his backpack. Rope had many uses, so he took it if he could. The backpack was soon full, and Qin Muyang also added some items the shopkeeper had stored in it earlier: a windproof lighter, a pack of band-aids, and a small folding knife. After packing everything, he circled the supermarket twice to ensure he hadn't missed any essentials and that the backpack could hold no more. Then he picked up the now-dried patient's gown draped over the shelf and put it on. He hoisted the backpack onto his shoulders, gauging its weight at roughly 20-odd jin. Qin Muyang had stuffed it as full as possible, but the capacity was limited. He had even tied some food outside the pack with rope, trying to carry more. But the exposed items could rustle, posing a deadly risk. Even inside the backpack, he had removed the outer packaging of certain items, provided the contents wouldn't be damaged, to save space and avoid the crinkling sound of plastic bags. After adjusting the straps, Qin Muyang cast one last glance at the supermarket, put on a sun protective mask, and opened the door to leave. As he walked, he couldn't help but lament the vast supplies in the supermarket, the large bottles of mineral water and all, now utterly wasted. He could no longer linger to enjoy the supermarket's goods. He needed to find a relatively safe shelter before dark. Those items would be left for any other survivors. Though he wasn't sure if any other survivors existed in this world. If he passed a safe clothing store along the way, he planned to get a clean, comfortable change of clothes. Wandering around in a hospital gown felt absurd, especially worrying about encountering living people who might mistake him for a mental patient. That would be unfortunate. After all, many people would instinctively assume someone in a hospital gown outside a medical facility was insane. Passing a tobacco and liquor store near the supermarket, Qin Muyang held his breath, skirted a corpse, and grabbed a few packs of cigarettes from the counter. Who knew? These might become hard currency in the future. He'd take a few, they weighed nothing. With the cigarettes in hand, Qin Muyang once again stood at the crossroads. This time he chose to go straight ahead again, avoiding the zombies on the cross streets. He didn't want to fight his way through with an iron rod the entire way, exhausting himself and risking encirclement. His immediate need was to find a bookstore and get a detailed city map. There were maps at the bus stops, but they were exaggerated versions, only marking a few bus routes through neighborhoods, far from detailed and utterly confusing. For someone like him, an out-of-towner here for university, those maps were as good as useless. Qin Muyang trudged forward, head down. The streets remained uniformly desolate and bleak, littered with trash and wrecked cars, shards of glass, glinting, looted shops standing empty. He forced himself to ignore the zombies lurking in the shadows, scanning the signs for anything useful. Like a men's clothing store, a bookstore with detailed maps, a pharmacy not completely ransacked. Strange, since this was near a hospital. Pharmacies should be everywhere. Yet all had seen was one stripped clean with only cardboard boxes and bewildered zombies inside. He spotted several clothing stores, but all sold women's wear. The only one with men's clothes was overrun with zombies. Qin Muyang sniffed his own scent and decided it wasn't yet unbearable. He could wear the hospital gown for another couple of days, so he abandoned the risky idea of raiding a clothing store. But getting a map was non-negotiable. It was crucial, even life-threatening. Without one, he couldn't possibly find his way back to the university, let alone locate Jiang Yuanfan and Gao Fei. In this era, few people read physical books. Most read online or bought paperbacks via the internet. Brick-and-mortar bookstores were barely surviving, their numbers dwindling yearly. What they did sell was mostly test prep materials and practice exams. He walked the entire street without seeing a single bookstore. Shadows slowly crept across the sunlit road, the buildings' silhouettes lengthening as the sun sank westward. A few zombies had already emerged from the shops, shuffling onto the street. Qin Muyang had been walking down the middle of the road, keeping a safe distance from the zombies in the stores. But now they were on the street, and he could no longer pretend not to see them. He gripped the iron rod again. He wouldn't actively seek out zombies to clear, but if any blocked his path, he wouldn't hesitate. Thud. The iron rod pierced his skull, mucus dripping as the zombie collapsed with a dull thud. Qin Muyang looked down at the grotesque face, a pang of sorrow in his heart. It had once been a living human like himself, capable of thought, with a future with family. Now it was just a walking corpse, perhaps even attacking the very family it once protected. He swore he would never become that. If bitten, he would end himself before the infection took hold. No, he wouldn't be bitten. He had to find a bookstore, get a map, and return to the university. He couldn't lose heart. Qin Muyang tightened his grip on the iron rod and thrust again. Another zombie fell. He advanced step by step, zombies approaching him, as if in a queue. He swung the rod incessantly, pushing. As time slipped away, more and more zombies flooded the streets, the unconscious guttural sounds from their throats filling the air. He glanced back and saw a large horde of zombies trailing him, having gathered at some unknown point. If viewed from a height, the scene would be spectacular. A young man with a bulging black backpack wielding an iron rod as he walked, each strike felling a zombie. Ahead, zombies converged on him like a radiating pattern. Behind, a dark mass followed. It felt like leading a parade formation. Qin Muyang began to feel the pressure. The sleep in the supermarket had restored his energy, and he had eaten plenty of high-calorie food and drunk enough water, bringing him back to a relatively vigorous state. But even with that vigor, he couldn't keep marching under the sun with a heavy load, taking down zombie after zombie. His arms grew sore as if he could no longer swing the iron rod. The backpack felt heavier, the straps digging into his shoulders, making him unsteady. Beyond physical exhaustion, the sky was darkening. Only a sliver of golden sunset remained on the street, and the zombies grew more active, pouring out of the shops on both sides. Roars and footsteps intermingled, all surging toward Qin Muyang. Finding a bookstore or a map was not the top priority now. The most important thing was to find a hiding place to survive the immediate crisis and the long night ahead. Qin Muyang swung his weapon and stabbed a zombie to death. Seizing the brief respite, he glanced around only to see zombies surging in from all directions. He could no longer make out the words on the street signs. Night fell quickly. If he couldn't find a shelter soon, his life would surely be in danger. Qin Muyang knocked down the zombies in front of him, broke free from their encirclement, and began to sprint. He no longer cared which direction he was running in. After all, he didn't know the way and had no specific destination. The best strategy was to head towards whichever direction had fewer zombies. As the night grew darker and his vision became blurred, weaving through the horde of zombies, Qin Muyang couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. He knew that at any moment he might be cornered and devoured by the swarming undead. Moreover, the gaps between the zombies for escape were shrinking. Earlier, there had been a zombie every 2 or 3 meters, but now it had narrowed to 1 or 2 meters, as almost all the zombies from the shops on both sides had come out. During his escape, he had to dodge and weave to avoid the zombies' wildly grasping hands, and from time to time, he had to knock down one that blocked his path. Qin Muyang was utterly exhausted and miserable. Fortunately, these zombies had only just reanimated and were not very agile, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. In this kind of life, I absolutely need teammates. Too many teammates wouldn't do. A large group would easily attract attention and draw zombies closer. A team of a few people would be just right, flexible. Qin Muyang planned in his mind for the future need of a team. However, he wasn't sure if he could find teammates who would be compatible with him. He didn't even know if there were any other living people in the world besides himself. Along the way, he hadn't seen a single trace of another living soul. Amidst his wandering thoughts, a huge dark mass appeared ahead, blocking the road. It was a pileup of crashed cars which not only cut off the street, but also trapped a large horde of zombies there. Qin Muyang was startled. He was truly trapped now. The road ahead was blocked and a horde of zombies was chasing him from behind. Was he going to die here? His mind raced, trying to find a way out of this predicament. Suddenly, in the afterglow of the sunset, he noticed that the rolling shutter door of a small shop by the street wasn't completely closed. There was still about half a meter gap at the bottom. Without a second thought, Qin Muyang knocked down a few zombies with a bang, not caring whether they were dead or not, and took a deep breath to dash towards the small shop by the street. As the zombies swarmed in, he crouched down, rolled lightly on the ground, and slipped directly under the rolling shutter door. In a flash, his mind had already analyzed the situation. There was no way out on the street. The only chance to survive was to find a suitable shop nearby to hide in. The rolling shutter door of this shop was half closed. The height made it difficult for zombies to enter easily. Moreover, he had been outside for a while, and no sounds of zombies came from inside, proving it was safe. Even if there were zombies trapped inside, their number wouldn't be as large as the horde on the street, and he should still have the strength to deal with them. The shop was pitch black. Qin Muyang groped in the dark, grabbed the rolling shutter door, and pulled it down. The door made a clattering noise. It seemed the door hinges were rusty. Qin Muyang struggled to pull it down until the door was completely flush. Just before the door closed completely, he saw a very lean, large dog running towards him. Without a second's hesitation, he shut the door tight. In normal times, saving a stray dog would be a simple act of kindness. But in the current situation, even a stray dog posed a threat. Who knew if it would attack him out of hunger? The stray dogs that were still alive now had probably already tasted fresh flesh and blood and would not be loyal to humans. Clang. It was probably the stray dog hitting the rolling shutter door, letting out a mournful whine. Immediately, a cacophony of banging sounds erupted on the door, made by the zombies. Then came the sound of miserable howling. Whimper. The sound made one shudder, amazed that a dog could make such a terrifying noise. Soon the dog's howling gradually faded. Qin Muyang felt something under his feet. He fished out a windproof lighter from his backpack and flicked it on with a click. In the flickering dim light, he saw bright red blood seeping in through the gap under the rolling shutter door. It belonged to the stray dog. The zombies were feasting on the stray dog's flesh, stopping their assault on the door. The surroundings grew quiet, leaving only the sounds of teeth tearing flesh and constant chewing, which made one's scalp tingle. Qin Muyang moved away from the door and, using the light, surveyed the shop. In the brief moment he entered, he had glimpsed a shop sign that said something about clothing, but he hadn't read it clearly. In any case, it was a clothing store. As he checked the clothing store for any dangers, he pondered whether he could find a set of clothes to replace his hospital gown. At that moment, Qin Muyang's expression couldn't hold. This clothing store. It seemed a bit different. Holding up the windproof lighter, Qin Muyang saw rows of sexy slip dresses, ultra-thin wire-free bras, and lace panties hanging before him. He was completely stunned. If it's an underwear store, why call it a clothing store on the sign? Qin Muyang couldn't help but complain. He was still a virgin. Suddenly being so close to girls' private lingerie made him blush uncontrollably. Even though no one else was there, he still felt a sense of shame, as if he were peeping. Ahem, it's okay. These clothes aren't on anyone. Qin Muyang comforted himself, then gave up the idea of finding a change of clothes and began to carefully check if the environment was safe. The shop wasn't very large. There were 2 clothing racks in the middle and 1 on each wall. Each rack was hung with garments Qin Muyang had never seen before. It would be strange if he had seen this kind of lingerie. Fortunately, the lighter in his hand wasn't bright enough to illuminate the entire shop, so his embarrassment wasn't too intense. Behind the shop was a white cashier counter. He found several beautifully scented aromatherapy candles on it. After lighting them, they provided some illumination, though with a strong, heady fragrance. So he put away the windproof lighter and used the scented candle in a glass jar as a light source. He checked the entire shop thoroughly. It was clean and tidy with no danger. It seemed he could spend the night here. However, Qin Muyang wasn't the careless type. Thinking that such shops might have a small storage room in the back, he didn't let his guard down. He went to the deepest part of the shop, raised the candle, and observed carefully. Sure enough, he found a hidden door on the wall that was almost seamlessly integrated into the wall. It was the kind of hidden door many shops had. One might easily overlook it without looking closely. Qin Muyang pressed his ear against the door and listened for a while, catching only faint sounds, as if there was a vast space beyond the door with something moving inside. Qin Muyang was no longer drowsy. Originally planning to spread something on the floor and rest, he now realized he couldn't sleep without eliminating this hidden danger. Yet with the invisible door blocking his way, Qin Muyang didn't rush. Having just escaped for his life outside, he needed rest. He sat down to catch his breath, pulled food and water from his backpack, and ate and drank slowly. Once his strength was mostly restored, he stood up, gripped an iron rod, and pried open the invisible door. No sooner had the door opened than he stepped back several paces, retreating directly into the area illuminated by the scented candles. The advantage of this was that by exposing himself to the light, if anyone were inside, seeing his appearance might deter them from acting rashly. If it were a zombie inside, even if it wanted to bite him, it would have to lunge forward. In a well-lit area, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage when dealing with it. In the end, nothing emerged. Qin Muyang waited for 2 or 3 minutes, but nothing came out from within the door. The sounds he had heard through the door persisted, and he realized they were coming from above. After a brief consideration, Qin Muyang picked up the candle, grabbed the iron rod, and stepped inside. Behind the door was a small stairwell with a restroom below the stairs and some cardboard boxes piled nearby, likely the store's inventory. The stairs led straight to the 2nd floor, a common structure for shops in this area. The sound Qin Muyang heard was coming from a room on the 2nd floor. After first confirming that the restroom and the area under the stairs posed no issues, he carried the candle and ascended the stairs. The higher he climbed, the louder the noise from the room above. The growing sound didn't worry Qin Muyang. Instead, it gradually eased his mind. The commotion above changed in response to the sounds he made. The louder he was, the more agitated the source above became, indirectly suggesting that there was a zombie upstairs, not a person or anything else. Sure enough, when Qin Muyang reached the 2nd floor, he saw a bedroom as spacious as the shop below. A provocatively dressed zombie lunged at him the moment he appeared. Qin Muyang was prepared. He easily dispatched the zombie in a pink princess dress, dragged it into the hallway, and then turned into the bedroom himself. The flickering flame in his hand outlined the shape of the room. It was a highly feminine space with everything in shades of pink. A pink single bed, a pink little sofa, a pink and white desk walls plastered with cartoon stickers. Only the computer on the desk had a normal appearance. Everything else had been modified by the room's owner to exude a girlish charm. Beside the computer were several fill lights along with a phone camera and other tools resembling a live streaming setup. It seemed the occupant was an internet celebrity. Seeing the phone, Qin Muyang couldn't resist grabbing it immediately. He hadn't touched such a modern device in age. If he had a phone, could he make calls or go online? Could he finally understand his current situation? Yet no matter how he tried, the phone wouldn't turn on, clearly out of battery. Qin Muyang searched the room and found a power bank covered in stickers, but it too was dead. His last shred of hope vanished. Qin Muyang let out a sigh, placed the phone back on the desk, and surveyed his surroundings once more. At least tonight, I won't have to sleep on the floor downstairs, he murmured to himself. And I won't have to hear those disgusting sounds from the rolling door, he muttered. Through the rolling door, he could hear the listening to such sounds while sleeping would surely lead to nightmares. He then went downstairs to retrieve the remaining scented candles and his backpack, returning upstairs. In the hallway, he saw the zombie in the pink dress he had just killed. It was likely the room's owner, but judging by her age, she seemed past the age for such girlish tastes. She had probably decorated it this way for her live streams. He had heard before that some internet celebrities used filters and beauty effects that could make them look 10 years younger. He hadn't believed it then, but now he did. Couldn't these influencers be more genuine and less gimmicky? If only they were like his classmate. He had a female classmate who also did live streams. She had an amazing figure, great looks with long black straight hair and a soft, gentle voice. She streamed in normal clothes with wholesome content, just singing and chatting. But such a normal stream drew few viewers. She just couldn't get popular. Filled with confusion, Qin Muyang blew out the candle, lay down on the pink little bed, and soon drifted. Knowing he was safe here, he slept peacefully and woke precisely at dawn. Unfortunately, after waking, he found that his body felt not refreshed, but more fatigued, and he was burning. Could I be infected? Qin Muyang shuddered, quickly stripping off all his clothes to carefully inspect his body for any unnoticed wounds. His heart pounded as he feared seeing inadvertent scratches or bites from zombies. Yet as far as he recalled, despite his frantic escape yesterday, no zombie had gotten close to him. Even so, he was still uneasy. He walked to the window and pulled open the curtains to let in the light, allowing a clearer view of his body. The room had a full-length mirror. Qin Muyang stood before it to examine his back. For a moment, he felt like a narcissist admiring himself. Fortunately, there were no signs of zombie scratches or bites on his body. The finger marks on his waist from before had nearly faded. Qin Muyang quickly put on his soiled hospital gown and began searching the room for anything useful he could take, preferably a map. Searching near the window, he pulled the curtains wide and couldn't help but stick his head out for a look. Then his gaze. The street below was packed with zombies, densely crowding almost the entire area outside the small shop. Last night, while he slept, the zombies had feasted on a stray dog outside, drawing even more of them to gather at the zombies only moved with purpose when hunting or tracking sounds, otherwise they just wandered in circles. Overnight, hundreds of them had gathered and were now prowling downstairs. This street did not run east-west, meaning that aside from certain specific times, it was almost never touched by sunlight. Without the influence of sunlight, these zombies would not seek shelter, merely lingering downstairs and possibly attracting even more of their kind. Qin Muyang couldn't help but curse under his breath. Already feeling unwell with signs of a fever, he had thought this place safe enough to rest for another day, but now it seemed he would have to flee while still ill. The zombies were gathering in greater numbers. From the window, he could see more converging from both ends of the street, the commotion growing louder. If he stayed another day, by nightfall zombies from elsewhere would surely drift closer, their numbers swelling until escape became even more difficult. It might even trigger a zombie horde. Qin Muyang had seen the gruesome and spectacular sight of such hordes in movies. And sometimes a horde erupted from something as trivial as a single incident. A soda can rattled by the wind could set off a chase, the pursuing crowd swelling until it became a tide of undead. Such things were not beyond possibility. Before the number of zombies downstairs grew into an overwhelming force, he had to find a way out. Qin Muyang turned to gather his belongings, needing to lighten his load. In truth, his burden was not heavy. A backpack of just over 20 gene, trivial for a 6-foot athlete, but now weakened by fever and facing a desperate flight, that weight would hinder his progress. He discarded everything non-essential, knowing the importance of prioritizing. Even the scented candles he had meant for lighting were reduced to a single one. If he had to shelter somewhere at night, he could use it to inspect his surroundings. Though they provided light, their weight was significant. Just a few small ones weighed nearly 2 gene. 2 gene might not sound like much, but when you are fleeing for your life, even an extra 2 liang could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And after yesterday's events, Qin Muyang had silently resolved that if he managed to escape this time, he would find a place to spend the night before the sun set each day to avoid being pursued by zombies and inviting unnecessary trouble. Finding shelter before total darkness had another advantage: no need for light to check for hazards, and he could wake early to set off at dawn. From now on, safety must come first. Finding a map and returning to school could wait. Though Qin Muyang felt his condition might not allow delay, his body seemed to be deteriorating. He truly feared collapsing senseless on some street. Fortunately, his previous fainting had not been sudden, or at least he had felt drowsy before losing consciousness. As long as he stayed alert and found a place to sleep the moment fatigue struck, he could manage. Lost in thought, Qin Muyang finished packing. His backpack was several jeans lighter, yet it still felt heavy, but he could discard nothing more. Those were necessities like food and water. With everything packed, the greatest challenge remained how to escape. The main entrance downstairs was impassable, completely blocked. To leave, he would have to find a way from the second floor. Qin Muyang returned to the window, scrutinizing the outside scene, missing no detail. Any detail could be the key to survival. Just below the window were shop signs welded to the wall with iron brackets. The signs on either side were at roughly the same height, extending for several shops before changing. That meant if the sign could bear his weight, he could step onto it and move forward past the densest cluster of zombies below, then lower himself to the street with a rope. With luck, he might even skip the rope and climb directly into a second-floor shop, then stride out casually from the... Qin Muyang reached out and shook the iron bracket beneath the window. A creak sounded, and he quickly withdrew. Several zombies downstairs looked up in unison, though most merely reacted to the noise with agitated... It seemed the sign's load-bearing capacity was weaker than he had hoped. Corroded with age, it might give way underfoot. He needed tools. He could tie a rope to the window frame, hold it for balance, and walk along the sign. But every few meters, he would have to secure the rope to the wall, or it would lose its protective function. He had taken a bundle of rope from the supermarket earlier, but it wasn't long enough. If he simply lowered it straight down and climbed the length would suffice. But to support his advance and then descend further ahead, it fell far short. Qin Muyang immediately began searching the room for more rope. In truth, he had already searched the room thoroughly. There was no rope. If I tie the sheets together, it might work. Qin Muyang recalled how on the third floor of the hospital, he had escaped by knotting bed sheets into a rope. But the situation now was more complicated than at the hospital, and with so many zombies below, a misstep would mean utter ruin. A rope made only from sheets and blankets would be too short. He needed more fabric. Fabric. A sudden spark of inspiration lit up Qin Muyang's mind. What kind of place was this? A clothing store. Even if the clothes were a certain style, they were still made of fabric, weren't they? All those tiny camisoles he had seen yesterday, couldn't they come in handy? Sorry, little camisoles, I really need you. Qin Muyang hurried downstairs and began collecting long camisole dresses to braid into a rope. The shop's roll-down door had been warped by the zombies pressing from outside, or it probably wouldn't hold much longer. After gathering enough camisoles, he quickly returned upstairs to start braiding. Didn't know I had such good handiwork. Qin Muyang chuckled bitterly, finding humor in hardship. Half an hour later, he heard a sharp crack from below. Crash. It was the sound of the roll-down door being torn apart from the middle. Then came the clatter of racks. The zombies had entered the shop. They would soon force open the hidden door and flood the stairwell. Qin Muyang stopped braiding, slung on his backpack, draped the rope from the supermarket over his shoulder, tied the half-finished rope to the window frame, and climbed out, gripping the sill. Creak. The moment his foot touched the steel frame of the billboard, a jarring sound echoed. Fortunately, Qin Muyang had firmly gripped the coarse rope he had just woven, not placing his full weight on the billboard's frame, so the noise ceased. Looking down through the gaps in the billboard, he saw zombies surging like a tide into the shop, while more on the street outside converged toward him. Qin Muyang steadied himself, ignoring the situation below, and focused ahead, inching his way across. His hands and feet felt weak, a side effect of the fever. Thankfully, the dizziness wasn't severe, otherwise he might not have been able to hold the rope. Every few meters, Qin Muyang would secure the rope again, tying it to screws holding the billboard or window frames in case the billboard suddenly gave way and he swung down like a pendulum. The height wasn't enough to kill him if he fell, but landing in a nest of zombies was a terrifying thought, one that sent chills down his spine. After crossing the neighboring shop, he paused to catch his breath and tie the rope. Through the glass window, he suddenly spotted several zombies inside. Attracted by the sound of his ropeting, they lunged toward the window. Just then, Qin Muyang felt the ground beneath him give way. Boom. The shop's billboard plummeted. Qin Muyang clung to the rope, preventing himself from falling. Luckily, he had just secured the rope before the billboard fell. But now the zombies at the window were charging, and with both hands gripping the rope, he couldn't fend them off. Crack. The glass pane before him fractured under the zombies' impact. Then a spiderweb of cracks spread from the center. The glass shattered, raining down as Qin Muyang ducked to protect his face. Shards cascaded over him, clattering to the floor below. The noise drew the attention of zombies on the street, splitting them into two groups. One continued toward the lingerie shop, while the other gathered directly beneath him. Before Qin Muyang could lament his misfortune, a gust of wind rushed toward his face. A zombie from inside was attacking. He kicked off the wall, twisting to dodge. The zombie lunged, tumbling out the window and landing with a dull thud, attracting even more undead. He had two choices: let go of the rope and jump down, effectively offering himself to the zombies, or swing into the window on the rope and gamble on survival against the zombies inside. Without hesitation, he chose the latter. The second option offered a glimmer of hope. The first was pure suicide. Gripping the rope tightly, Qin Muyang swung into the window with all his strength, kicking his legs out to topple the nearest zombie. He then let go swiftly, drawing an iron rod from his waist. Gripped. Thrust. Shhk. With a sensation like cutting through a watermelon, the rod pierced the zombie's head. Before he could pull it out, another zombie lunged. Qin Muyang rolled to the side, landing a meter away, his hand reaching for a folding knife strapped to his backpack. It was a spare head taken from the supermarket owner, now proving useful. He quickly unfolded the knife and gripped it tight as a zombie's face loomed before him. Steeling himself, he thrust upward from under its chin. The blade sank into the zombie's flesh, and Qin Muyang felt his hand press against its skin, a cold, viscous touch that turned his stomach. The knife was sharp, entering silently without resistance. After dispatching these two zombies, he caught his breath and retrieved the iron rod and knife. The folding knife was quicker and required less effort, but it forced close contact with the zombies. Disgusting and unsafe. If his skin had any cuts, he risked infection from the zombie virus. Qin Muyang thought that if he survived, he must find a pair of gloves, though he wondered if they'd hinder his weapon use. The iron rod was more taxing but safer. Even if he missed a lethal strike, he had room to retreat. The folding knife offered no such margin. A missed thrust meant certain contact with the zombie, practically embracing death. Qin Muyang sheathed the knife and switched back to the iron rod. The remaining two zombies in the room, though charging with roars, were quickly dealt with. Surviving by a hair's breadth, he was nearly spent. Seeing the fallen zombies, he couldn't help but collapse. His forehead burned, his breathing was heavy, and his limbs felt too weak to stand. Though he knew he wasn't yet safe, he lacked the will to rise and move on. His left cheek felt oddly cool. Wiping it with his clean hand, he found it smeared with blood, bright. At first he thought it was from a zombie, but then realized zombies don't have such vivid red blood. Theirs was thick, dark, almost purple or black. This was his own blood. The thought exploded in his mind like a bomb, and he jolted upright. He was injured. Was it a bite or a scratch from a zombie? Was he turning? Was this the end? His mind conjured an image of himself as a zombie, but then he recalled when the glass shattered, shards might have cut his. He had dodged, but still got cut. Thank goodness it wasn't a zombie. Relieved, he fished band-aids from his backpack, slapped two on his face, and stopped the bleeding. He checked his body and found a wound on his lower back, still bleeding. Unable to treat it himself, he resolved to avoid contact with zombies or their fluids. After checking his injuries, he looked out the window. The gathered zombies below now outnumbered those at the clothing. He had to leave quickly, or the horde would only grow. He untied the rope from the window frame and fastened it to the other end, thus bypassing the fallen billboard entirely. This allowed him to advance a considerable distance while also ensuring greater safety. Though the earlier situation was perilous, it was not without its benefits. If every second-floor shop he passed had its windows open and was free of zombies, Qin Muyang felt he could traverse the entire street in this manner without needing to perform acrobatics on the billboards outside. Regrettably, the shops he encountered next all had their windows shut, some even with curtains drawn. He dared not force them open, fearing it would attract the attention of the zombies below, who would then chase him relentlessly. He also worried that if there were zombies inside, he would have to deal with them as well. His body was already in great discomfort, so it was best not to invite further trouble. After slowly moving past several shops, the rope he had woven was exhausted, and his arms had grown so weak and sore that he could no longer support himself in this manner. Qin Muyang tied on the length of rope he had taken from the supermarket and slowly slid down to the street. Before descending, he had observed that only a sparse few zombies were wandering about, posing no real threat. If he ran fast enough, he might not even need to dispatch these few zombies. Even so, the moment he landed, Qin Muyang immediately gripped his iron rod. Though his arms ached and he could barely lift it, he still assumed a defensive stance. Fortunately, the zombies were slow to react. By the time they sluggishly gave chase, Qin Muyang had already fled ahead. However, he failed to notice that the wound on his lower back was still bleeding, each drop of blood falling to the ground. Some zombies, catching the scent of blood, dropped to the ground and lapped it up. After licking the pavement clean, they rose and sniffed the air, following the trail to the next drop, where they again crouched to lick. By the time Qin Muyang noticed, more than a dozen zombies had gathered behind him. His limbs were weak, his head throbbed with sharp pain, and his body trembled uncontrollably. He knew without a doubt that he was burning up with fever and needed fever medicine, water, and a good sleep under it. Of these three necessities, the only one Qin Muyang could manage was to pull a bottle of water from the side pocket of his backpack and take a few small sips. Fever medicine or a proper sleep were far too luxurious for him now. He knew that from his lower back down to his pant legs his back must be soaked in blood, or otherwise it could not have attracted so many zombies. He knew that from his lower back down to his pant legs his back must be soaked in blood, or otherwise it could not have attracted so many zombies. That day at the supermarket entrance, smearing blood on a cloth strip had failed to attract zombies from a distance, which showed that the quantity of blood mattered. If he kept walking like this, even if the zombies didn't catch him, he would likely die from blood loss. Yet aside from moving forward endlessly, Qin Muyang could think of no other way to escape his predicament. There were no suitable hiding places on either side of the road, and he was unfamiliar with the street. Had he struggled so hard to escape only to meet his end in the jaws of zombies? His vision was blurring, and he might collapse in the street at any moment. Just then Qin Muyang thought he heard someone speaking, and it seemed the words were directed at him. Was it an illusion? Was he about to die? Hey, are you okay? Hey buddy, in the middle of the road. Are you injured? Bitten by a zombie? Hey, do you need help? The calls came one after another, growing increasingly urgent. Qin Muyang couldn't help but look toward the source of the voice. On an old residential building by the roadside, a girl with a ponytail was waving at him. Hey, how are you? When she saw Qin Muyang looking at her, the girl quickly asked. Qin Muyang forced a smile that was uglier than crying. I'm about to die. He said this, but in his heart, he thought, how wonderful, I've finally seen another living person. I'm not the only one left in this world. You haven't been bitten or scratched by a zombie, have you? The girl asked. Qin Muyang shook his head. Could go that way. The girl pointed in a direction. Qin Muyang immediately followed her lead. Normally one shouldn't trust strangers in such a situation, but the girl looked about his age and had an open, guileless demeanor. Besides, he was on the verge of death. Being deceived by such a pretty girl would be worth it. His mind in a turmoil, Qin Muyang walked forward. The girl had disappeared from the balcony. After walking several dozen steps, just as Qin Muyang thought she was toying with him, he heard her voice again. Hey, over here. Qin Muyang looked up to see the girl standing on a colorful steel awning waving at him. Go around to the other side. There's a flower stand there. Climb up using it. Qin Muyang did as instructed and indeed found a three-tiered flower stand. Stepping on it, he could reach the awning. Behind him, the zombies had drawn closer. Gritting his teeth, he mustered his strength and began to climb. It took him several minutes to make it onto the flower stand, draining nearly all his remaining energy. His vision blurred and black spots appeared before his eyes. The images he saw became sluggish like a slow-motion film. He crouched on the flower stand, the zombies below reaching for his feet. He had no strength left to climb onto the steel awning. The girl's head appeared above the awning as she looked down at him. Are you sure you weren't bitten or scratched? No, Qin Muyang answered truthfully. My wound is from broken glass. All right. The girl extended her hand to him. My name is Zhang Jin. And you? Qin Muyang grasped her hand, realizing she wasn't trying to pull him up, but rather to shake hands. He quickly replied, I'm Qin Muyang. Nice name. He'll pull you up. You look like you've got no strength left. She hauled him up. Zhang Jin was surprisingly strong, Qin Muyang thought as he lost consciousness. Because the moment he climbed onto the awning, he fainted. Dreams. Again, chaotic dreams. In them, he was chased by zombies running endlessly for his life. At one moment, a zombie bit the back of his head. The next, it clawed at his lower back. Another zombie whispered in his ear, asking if he had escaped from a mental hospital, given his hospital gown. What a strange dream. Since when could zombies talk? Thinking this, Qin Muyang opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was a delicate, fair face. He immediately recalled what had happened before he passed out. It was this girl Zhang Jin who had saved him. Qin Muyang thanked her repeatedly and sat up to look around. The room was a clean bedroom, but the furniture looked cheap, like that in a rented room for students, a single-room setup. Was this Zhang Jin's rented place? Qin Muyang wanted to ask her about herself, but felt it would be rude to interrogate his rescuer. Instead, he asked, how long was I unconscious? A day and a half, Zhang Jin replied. He wasn't sure if that was longer or shorter than his previous blackout, but he realized that the unit of time for his comas was measured in days. I remember passing out as soon as I reached that awning, said Qin Muyang. Zhang Jin's expression shifted, as if recalling an unpleasant memory. Don't mention it. I went through a lot of trouble to get you over here. Good thing you're slim. If you were 10 pounds heavier, I'd have left you out there to fend for yourself. The way Zhang Jin spoke and her demeanor confirmed Qin Muyang's earlier suspicion. She was a straightforward, carefree girl, and kind-hearted at that. Qin Muyang thanked Zhang Jin once more for saving his life. As if sensing his curiosity about how she had moved him from the awning into the house, she promptly explained, the security bars on the bedroom window over there can be removed. Once they're off, you can stand on the windowsill downstairs, walk along the ledge to the awning next door, then turn a corner, and reach where you passed out. It sounded quite complicated. Qin Muyang tried to visualize how Zhang Jin had carried his unconscious self back without causing any new injuries. He thanked her yet again, which made Zhang Jin burst into laughter. Are you going to thank me before every word you say from now on? Haha. This Zhang Jin was truly beautiful and kind. Having a teammate like her in the apocalypse wouldn't be bad at all. Qin Muyang nearly let his infatuation get the better of him, forgetting all about Jiang Yuanfan and the others. After all, she was the first living person he'd seen since waking up in the hospital. Maybe they were the only two left in the world. Good thing they were both attractive. The heavy responsibility of restoring human civilization seemed destined for my shoulders. Just as Qin Muyang was lost in thought, a sudden noise came from the next room. His nerves instantly tensed, and he reached for the iron rod on the bedside table. His belongings had been placed on the bedside table by Zhang Jin, unlike in the hospital where everything had vanished. But Zhang Jin showed no sign of tension. Instead, she looked toward the door with a loving gaze. The sound drew nearer, and Qin Muyang saw a slightly limping young man appear at the doorway. My boyfriend Li Mingchuan, Zhang Jin said. Qin Muyang's mouth twitched. He had already imagined naming the children he and Zhang Jin might have. After all, in this apocalypse, she had saved him, and they were alone, a handsome man and a beautiful woman. He was even ready to embrace the bitterness of love, but he couldn't voice such thoughts. Upon learning that Li Mingchuan had tended to his wounds, he warmly shook hands with him and expressed his gratitude, and silently mourned the fact that he'd have to struggle through single life a while longer. Li Mingchuan quickly took the lead in the conversation, starting to ask about Qin Muyang. Qin Muyang had nothing to hide, so he recounted everything from playing basketball, passing out, waking up, and escaping the hospital, even mentioning his possible fainting spells. Sensing goodwill from Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan, he openly revealed his weakness. True to form, the couple didn't mind his potential to faint for a day or two at any time, assuring him they'd take care of him if it happened. They were also deeply impressed that he had made it all the way from the Second People's Hospital on his own. When he described killing a zombie with his iron rod, their expressions even held a hint of admiration. It wasn't until later that Qin Muyang realized they were terrified of zombies. They were university students from a nearby school, sharing a 3-bedroom apartment with another classmate. Shortly before the zombie outbreak, Li Mingchuan had fractured a bone and was confined to the apartment to recover. Zhang Jin, who treated him like a brother, took it upon herself to look after him. Her way of caring meant gaming with him, ordering takeout, and sending his dirty laundry to the dry cleaner. In short, anything that could be solved with money, she never did herself. That was why after the zombie virus broke out, Zhang Jin, who couldn't cook, stockpiled instant noodles, vermicelli, self-heating meals, and canned goods, leaving them with plenty of food even now. When the news said an unknown virus was breaking out, I thought it'd be like that pandemic a few years ago, at worst a lockdown. Who knew it'd come to this, said Li Mingchuan. We didn't take it seriously at all. I just had Xiao Jin go out and buy a bunch of stuff. Exactly. We had no idea it would turn out like this, Zhang Jin chimed in. When I actually saw zombies rampaging through the streets, I was terrified. Then they detailed how afraid they were of the zombies, how they'd hide under the covers without moving, especially from the bedroom next door. Their roommate had been bitten and turned into a zombie, occasionally making strange noises through the wall, and the eerie sounds from the stairs outside the door haunting their hearts like a nightmare every night. Hearing this, Qin Muyang felt like laughing, especially when he saw the tall, burly Li Mingchuan putting on a frightened expression. It seemed rather effeminate. But then he thought back to how he must have looked when he saw that grayish hand reaching out from the hospital room in the corridor. His expression probably wasn't much better. He was merely a bit more mentally resilient than them. Li Mingchuan said they let their roommate howl in the next room for 2 days until the door was nearly clawed through. Only then did he muster the courage to open it and kill the zombie. His method was simple. Wrapped up tight, limping, he used a detached wardrobe door to shove the zombie from the balcony to the ground below. Bang! Problem solved. That one move exhausted him. They had resolved to starve in the room if food ran out rather than venture into the zombie-infested world outside. Over time, the two, who had treated each other like brothers, inexplicably became a couple, moving from separate rooms to sharing a bed. Qin Muyang figured it was mostly because they were both timid and cowardly. Sleeping together gave them mutual courage. He wanted to ask them about the outbreak, but they were just as clueless. All they knew was that the news had reported an unknown virus with infected people attacking others, urging everyone to stay home. So they assumed it was like the pandemic years ago, stocked up supplies, and stayed in their room gaming until 2 or 3 days later the entire city fell and no new messages came through. How many days has it been since the city turned like this? Qin Muyang asked. He wanted to gauge how long he had been unconscious, recalling that on the day he played basketball had heard something about a virus on the news, but hadn't paid it any mind. Just wondered why the streets were so empty. About 10 days, I think, Li Mingchuan said, glancing at Zhang Jin before nodding to himself. Yeah, around 10. Our phones died long ago, and the power banks didn't last much longer. Qin Muyang quickly calculated that he had been unconscious for about 2 days in the hospital and another 2 in the supermarket. Adding the day and a half here, that made nearly 6 days. Simple math. Thankfully, it wasn't an absurd number. Yet the virus had only been raging for a little over 10 days and the city had already become this. It was a shame that these two seemed oblivious to the outside world, or he could have learned more details. Zhang Jin speculated about the reasons behind Qin Muyang's fainting. She mentioned that Li Mingchuan had previously cleaned his wounds and discovered infections on the back of his head and waist, which likely caused a fever and subsequent collapse, though she couldn't be certain. Li Mingchuan asked Qin Muyang if he had brought any medicine from the hospital, suggesting he take some anti-inflammatory pills. Qin Muyang shook his head. He had fled without even a pair of underwear, let alone medication. Moreover, he had seen few pharmacies along the way. Logically, there should be many pharmacies near a tertiary hospital like the second hospital, but I only spotted one, and it was overrun by zombies. Qin Muyang remarked with confusion. Li Mingchuan explained that since he had climbed over the wall and not exited through the main gate, it was normal he hadn't seen the pharmacies. All the pharmacies near the second hospital were lined up on the main street outside the front gate. Qin Muyang then asked if there were any pharmacies nearby. Li Mingchuan said there was one on this street, but none of them dared to go. Qin Muyang and Li Mingchuan were still unwell and couldn't easily climb over the steel shed, while Zhang Jin was terrified of zombies. Besides, zombies were roaming downstairs, still searching for Qin Muyang's scent. The blood he had dripped earlier was an irresistible temptation for the long-starved undead. The three of them exchanged more information, but most of the time Qin Muyang did the talking. Having been active outside for days, the couple was curious about the outside world. When Qin Muyang's throat grew dry, Zhang Jin brought him a glass of water and then showed him around the house. Thus, Qin Muyang saw that nearly every pot and pan in the house had been utilized, all filled with water. On the balcony, there were also many buckets and basins, but they were empty. Zhang Jin explained that the tools on the balcony were for collecting rainwater, which would be filtered through a specialized faucet before use. Then she introduced something astonishing: the toilet. Pointing at the steel shed outside the balcony before she could speak, Qin Muyang interrupted, "Is this where you dragged me back from?" Zhang Jin nodded. "Yes, but that's not what I meant. I'm saying this is our toilet. If you need to pee, just stand on the balcony and aim anywhere downstairs. If you can't hit a zombie, it means you're short. For number 2, see that hole over there? That hole in the steel shed was cut out by us. If you need to go do it, they're aiming through the hole. Below is supposedly a bike parking area, but that doesn't matter now." Qin Muyang's eyes searched for the hole Zhang Jin mentioned on the steel shed. He noticed a roll of toilet paper thoughtfully placed beside it. Li Mingchuan forgot to bring the paper back after pooping again. Zhang Jin suddenly climbed over the balcony railing, carefully walked over to retrieve the paper, and explained, "If it rains, the paper will be wasted." This. Qin Muyang hesitated. Zhang Jin had already gone to argue with Li Mingchuan, scolding him for wasting paper. Qin Muyang stared at the so-called toilet, finding it absurd, yet somewhat reasonable. It was certainly better than pooping in a toilet without water to flush or in a plastic bag to throw downstairs. But not by much. It's the apocalypse, oh, one must make do. Qin Muyang felt that everything could now be blamed on the end of the world, making all the absurdity seem logical. After finishing the argument, Zhang Jin came to tell Qin Muyang, "Don't be shy. It's the apocalypse now, and no one cares about seeing your butt. I want peek, and those zombies outside probably won't either." Zhang Jin was truly a remarkable woman. Qin Muyang thought to himself. Zhang Jin was brash, but had a rough tenderness. Li Mingchuan was timid and cautious, but sincere. Qin Muyang enjoyed their company. He couldn't leave this place for now, needing time to recover before planning his next move. He generously shared the supplies from his backpack with the trio. In particular, they each took a few bites from a can of beef, savoring it as a feast to celebrate encountering fellow survivors in this apocalypse. The zombies, drawn by Qin Muyang's blood, gathered downstairs for days. Just as the trio feared a horde forming, the undead were lured away by stray dogs and gradually dispersed. With nothing to do, the three spent their days chatting, reminiscing about their past lives, and longing for the days when food delivery was available. Zhang Jin talked about her relationship with Li Mingchuan, sighing, "There's really no pure friendship between men and women. I used to think we were just friends, but then we became lovers." In the apocalypse, it was easy to understand two cowards relying on each other. A few days later, early one morning, Zhang Jin carried a pillow into Qin Muyang's room. Qin Muyang had just woken up. "Bro, from today you'll sleep with Li Mingchuan." Zhang Jin tossed the pillow onto the bed. "We broke up last night." "Ranked up? How many stars?" Qin Muyang blurted out. Zhang Jin's mouth twitched. "I said we broke up last night. I was so wrong before. There really is true friendship between men and women. We were only meant to be friends. As lovers, things we tolerated as friends became unbearable." Qin Muyang looked at the pillow in Zhang Jin's hand. "Are you mistaken? You should ask him to come here." Knowing that the bedroom they shared was originally Zhang Jin's alone, he absolutely couldn't stay in a woman's room, especially with her ex-boyfriend. That would be too awkward. Zhang Jin scratched her head. You have a point. She left with the pillow. Soon after, Li Mingchuan came over dejectedly, without even a pillow. Qin Muyang expected to feel awkward caught between the two after their breakup, but to his surprise they acted exactly the same as before, except they no longer shared a bed. Qin Muyang was speechless. After 5 or 6 days, he felt fully recovered. His headaches were gone, the wound on his waist had scabbed over, and he hadn't fainted again. He knew it was time to decide whether to stay or leave. Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan didn't mind him staying. They even hoped he would remain for company. But Qin Muyang felt this place wasn't safe enough. Over the past 2 days, he noticed more zombies wandering on the street below, and those that had scattered were slowly returning. Though many vanished during the day or hid under the steel shed at night, the zombies' hoarse groans were clearly audible, and sometimes he could hear their fingernails scraping against the wall downstairs. The number of zombies in the stairwell seemed to increase, and occasionally there would be sudden bangs against the door. Qin Muyang tried to convince the couple to leave and find a safer place. But both insisted the outside was too dangerous and preferred to stay in the house waiting until they had no other choice before saying goodbye to the world. They absolutely refused to leave. Qin Muyang didn't press them. They were ready to face death, but he wasn't. He began preparing for his departure. The following day, Qin Muyang asked Li Mingchuan for paper and a pen, then based on their descriptions sketched a simple map of the nearby streets, marking the locations of supermarkets, convenience stores, pharmacies, and grocery stores they could recall. Naturally, he also noted areas likely teeming with zombies, such as schools, hospitals, large shopping malls, and high-rise residential buildings, which Qin Muyang needed to avoid. Regrettably, neither of them knew how to get to Beishan University from there. Like Qin Muyang, they were out-of-town students unfamiliar with Beishan City. However, Zhang Jin mentioned she knew the location of a bookstore, suggesting Qin Muyang could look for a detailed map of Beishan City there. Qin Muyang quickly marked the bookstore's location. After completing the simple map of the surrounding area, he devised 2 routes with one serving as a backup. Preparing for every eventuality increased his chances of survival, and he had no intention of giving up on life easily. Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan were reluctant to see Qin Muyang leave, packing him a pile of food and drink, while urging him to return anytime if life outside proved harsh. Qin Muyang's face darkened. He suspected they were playing the role of his parents to take advantage of him, but he had no proof. Seeing his backpack stuffed to the brim, he felt a bit embarrassed. Knowing that after he left the two would rely on the remaining supplies to survive and would not venture out again, he promptly pulled out the food and drink he had packed. In the end, he prepared only a day and a half's worth of water and food. He could continue scavenging outside, and leaving more food for Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan meant they could live another day longer. With everything ready, Qin Muyang did not rush to leave. It was already noon. Heading out now would mean enduring the scorching sun, with little time to act, likely forcing him to seek a night shelter shortly after departing. He decided to set out early the next morning. That afternoon, the air grew stifling and oppressive, making it hard to breathe. By evening, a torrential rain began to fall. The rain splashed up dust, filling the air with a yellow haze that stung the nose, forcing them to seal all doors and windows tightly, until water flowed like rivers on the ground, easing the situation. Fierce winds and torrential rain lashed the entire city, every door and window groaning under the strain. The downpour roared so loudly that nothing else could be heard but the storm. Even though the 3 of them were together in the living room, they had to shout to be heard, and even then they could barely make out. After their voices gave out, they stopped trying to communicate. It was futile. Fortunately, the external noise was so overwhelming that the zombies couldn't hear them, merely wandering aimlessly through the building. The 3 sat silently in the dark living room like ghosts. Eventually, Qin Muyang, unable to bear it, lit the scented candle he had planned to take with him. Amid the storm, the entire building seemed to sway as if on the verge of collapse. Although the room was well sealed, it couldn't withstand the extreme weather outside. Wind seeped through the cracks in doors and windows, howling like vengeful spirits. Rainwater intruded through the gaps, soon soaking the floor of Zhang Jin's bedroom. Zhang Jin tried to find humor in the misery, remarking that it was good. They had plenty of water to store and wouldn't face a shortage. Qin Muyang, however, gestured frantically, shouting something. In the candlelight, his rapid movements puzzled Li Mingchuan. Was he forming hand seals to cast a spell? Qin Muyang, regretting not knowing sign language, stood up and headed toward the kitchen. Suddenly, both Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan understood Qin Muyang's intention. The kitchen and Zhang Jin's bedroom faced the same direction. If the bedroom was flooding, the kitchen couldn't be in good shape. Almost all the food and water were stored in the kitchen. The 3 rushed to the kitchen, stepping into water as soon as they opened the door. The water was ankle deep, and it immediately gushed into the living room. The scene in the kitchen was predictable. Zhang Jin returned with the scented candle for light, revealing a pile of soaked items on the floor. Quick, move everything to higher ground in the living room. Qin Muyang shouted and gestured, fearing they couldn't hear. This time both quickly grasped his meaning. Zhang Jin grabbed a bucket of water to carry away, but Li Mingchuan pressed her hand down, indicating water wasn't urgent. The room was flooded, so there was no shortage they needed to save the food. They had just brought a box of instant noodles and some self-heating meals to the living room when the wind outside suddenly intensified, howling as if to tear the house down. The glass windows rattled violently. Qin Muyang felt a sudden chill as a gust of wind burst in, and the sound of the wind turned into a sharp shriek like a coach's urgent whistle during physical training. Qin Muyang looked toward the kitchen window. The glass reflected the candle Zhang Jin had placed nearby, its flame flickering wildly. Then the candle went out. The entire room plunged into endless darkness. Qin Muyang abandoned the search for supplies, instead groping in the dark to grab Li Mingchuan and Zhang Jin, pulling them back into the living room before turning to shut the kitchen door. The moment the door closed, the kitchen window emitted a cracking sound as it struggled against the gale. Then the entire window frame, glass and all, was swept away into the boundless night and rain. Even the kitchen door, just closed by Qin Muyang, sprang open under the pressure, but fortunately, he had already led the other two away from it. Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan, who had been puzzled as to why Qin Muyang was frantically calling for salvaging supplies one moment and dragging them away the next, were now terrified, shrinking like frightened chicks. Lighter items in the living room flew up and down in the wind, or were swept straight out the open door, soaring through the broken kitchen window into the night sky. If the living room was like this, the kitchen was even worse. Apart from some sturdy cabinets, even the cabinet doors were torn off by the fierce wind and blown away. The three huddled in a corner of the living room, terrified, sensing their supplies vanishing bit by bit in the dark. That feeling of helplessness was as overwhelming as the shock when the zombie outbreak first struck. Zhang Jin vividly remembered that moment downstairs when zombies suddenly appeared and the crowd fled in panic. A little girl separated from her parents stood crying at the intersection, not knowing where to run. Zhang Jin wanted to go down and help her, but hearing the zombies' roars and seeing the blood splattered on the ground, she ultimately couldn't bring herself to do it. That same sense of helplessness surged within her again. Soon the trio heard another loud crash, realizing that the window in Zhang Jin's bedroom had also been blown. As expected, her bedroom door was instantly torn open by the force of the wind, greatly increasing the airflow in the living room and even sweeping in the rain from outside, soon soaking the entire living space. Despite it being the height of summer, they felt a chill. The family upstairs likely faced a similar plight, as they could hear a constant clattering from the floor above, objects inside being battered by the wind after their windows were blown out, interspersed with chaotic footsteps. But Qin Muyang remembered Li Mingchuan saying that no one alive remained upstairs. Those footsteps must belong to zombies. Qin Muyang's gaze fell upon the entrance door to the living room. Though he could see nothing, his heart tightened. If this continued, would the door be blown open by the wind? If the door opened, the zombies roaming the hallway would surely flood in. Qin Muyang pressed Li Mingchuan and Zhang Jin's shoulders, signaling them to stay put while he slowly rose. He hunched over, lowering his center of gravity to avoid falling, and moved forward a few steps until he reached the sofa. The sofa was already soaked, feeling unpleasant to the touch, like a wet kitchen rag. But Qin Muyang felt a surge of joy. The wet sofa was heavier, perfect for his purpose. He pushed the sofa with both hands, slowly guiding it toward the entrance door. Everything was done in darkness, relying solely on memory. Having lived here for a few days, Qin Muyang was fairly familiar with the place. By the time he firmly wedged the sofa against the entrance door, Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan still had no idea what had happened. Both were naturally timid. In such an atmosphere in darkness, they could only crouch obediently in the corner, motionless, their muscles still taut. After securing the sofa, Qin Muyang crouched and moved back. Just then he felt water dripping from the ceiling. The upstairs window had been blown out and water was flooding in. In ordinary houses, living rooms aren't waterproofed, so rainwater was seeping down from above. Qin Muyang's mind raced, considering how to find a relatively comfortable place to stay in such conditions. If they spent the whole night in the living room exposed to the wind and rain, they would surely fall ill. Having already lost so many supplies, they would be left to die. Qin Muyang shuffled back to Li Mingchuan and shouted, "Does the master bedroom have a bathroom?" The master bedroom was where the roommate who turned into a zombie had lived. Qin Muyang had never entered it. Li Mingchuan and Zhang Jin hadn't set foot in that room since tossing the zombified roommate out. Li Mingchuan also shouted back, "What? You need to use the toilet. Don't be picky now, just go in the living room. We won't judge you." Every word he spoke was constantly blown back into his mouth by the wind, making his speech fragmented. But Qin Muyang understood him clearly and frowned him, asking if there's a bathroom in there. Li Mingchuan nodded, then realizing it was pitch black, yelled yes. Without another word, Qin Muyang grabbed them both and groped his way toward the master bedroom. Water was pouring from the ceiling like a small waterfall, drenching them completely. Zhang Jin was shivering. Li Mingchuan wondered why Qin Muyang was dragging him along for courage to the bathroom, and why he was also pulling. Once they felt their way into the master bathroom and found no water dripping from the ceiling, Li Mingchuan understood. The bathroom was waterproof, but water from upstairs wouldn't leak through. The guest bathroom adjacent to the living room and facing the wrong direction had already had its windows shattered by the wind. The only truly safe spot in the entire house was this master bathroom. It was free from leaks and protected from broken windows. Once inside, the sound of wind and rain diminished significantly, and the temperature was several degrees warmer. Qin Muyang also felt his way to the wardrobe and pulled out some dry clothes. In the pitch black, he relied entirely on touch. The top layer was soaked, only the bottom few items were dry. Carefully protecting the dry clothes, he returned to the bathroom and tossed them to Li Mingchuan and Zhang Jin. They changed in the dark without embarrassment. Fortunately, the roommate was male. If it had been a woman, only Zhang Jin would have fit into those dry clothes. Having been tense in the living room earlier, now in a dry, windproof environment, they felt much safer. Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan quickly relaxed and soon fell asleep. But Qin Muyang dared not sleep. Though the sofa blocked the entrance, there was no guarantee it would hold. If enough zombies crowded the hallway or the wind grew strong enough, the door could still be forced open. Qin Muyang decided not to tell Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan. They would only panic and lose sleep. The mere mention of zombies terrified them enough. Better to let them conserve energy for dealing with the aftermath of the storm tomorrow. There would surely be much to clean up. Of course, after this tempest, the house might no longer be habitable. Qin Muyang sat in the darkness, his mind highly active. If zombies really broke, and how should he respond? He had no suitable weapon at hand, and nothing in the bathroom could be used against them. The iron rod was still in the adjacent bedroom. If only he could get it. But he had just changed into dry clothes, and fetching the rod would likely wet them again. Lost in such scattered thoughts, Qin Muyang gradually fell asleep. He slept for about 2 hours, and when he woke, the sky was faintly light, allowing him to vaguely discern the outlines of objects around him. Lost in such scattered thoughts, Qin Muyang gradually fell asleep. He slept for about 2 hours, and when he woke, the sky was faintly light, These two kept saying they had broken up. What a farce. Qin Muyang slowly rose to check the situation out. The wind seemed to have stopped, no more howling could be heard. But the sound of rushing water persisted, whether from rain outside, water still dripping from upstairs, or both, he couldn't tell. Qin Muyang opened the bathroom door and stepped into the master bedroom. Water was still falling from the ceiling, soaking nearly everything in the room, though no water pooled. It must have seeped down to the floor below. The living room was in worse shape. When he opened the master bedroom door, he saw the entire space looked as if it had been ransacked by bandits. All small items had vanished, leaving only large furniture all displaced. The glass coffee table had shattered during the peak of the wind last night, yet not a single shard remained on the floor. Like the master bedroom, water dripped steadily from the living room ceiling, forming a thin layer on the ground. Qin Muyang stepped into the living room to assess the damage. Suddenly, he noticed that the sofa blocking the entrance door had shifted slightly, leaving a gap of several dozen centimeters. Disaster. A zombie must have gotten in. Qin Muyang instinctively reached for something nearby to use as a weapon, only to realize there was nothing suitable within his grasp. He had to return to the bedroom to retrieve that iron rod, hoping it was still there. But before fetching the rod, he needed to close the front door first. He could already hear the characteristic hoarse groans of zombies from outside. If more of them slipped in while he was getting the weapon, things would become dire. Qin Muyang tiptoed toward the front door. Just as he closed it and prepared to shove the sofa back to block it, he turned around and saw a zombie staggering out from the kitchen. Fortunately, the house was filled with the constant dripping of water from leaks, muffling the sounds Qin Muyang made, so the zombie remained unaware. His only task now was to avoid making too much noise, use the dripping sounds as cover to return to the bedroom he had stayed in for days, grab the iron rod, and come out to dispose of this zombie. Walking across the wet living room made it hard not to create some noise. Luckily, the dripping sounds masked everything, and the zombie, still aimlessly wandering, took no notice. Relieved, Qin Muyang quickened his pace. But the zombie seemed mildly curious about moving objects. Despite his best efforts to keep low, its murky eyes caught sight of him. It merely stared without any other reaction. Perhaps it was sizing him up, trying to determine if he was a fellow creature or fresh flesh. The air was thick with the fishy and muddy stench left by the heavy rain, preventing the zombie from immediately detecting the scent of a living human on Qin Muyang. Qin Muyang twisted open the door to his bedroom and slipped inside. In the moment he closed the door, he saw 2 more zombies staggering out of the kitchen. 3. At least 3 zombies were now in the house. 3 wasn't too many. If he had a suitable weapon, he could use the various items and rooms in the house to split them up and take them down one by one. Qin Muyang firmly shut the bedroom door and found the room in chaos. He searched through the mess for the iron rod, silently praying that Li Mingchuan and Zhang Jin were still fast asleep and wouldn't wake up now. Otherwise, things might get troublesome. They could even get hurt. While Qin Muyang searched for the rod in the master bedroom's bathroom, Zhang Jin woke up because her leg had gone numb from being pressed. Seeing the sky gradually brighten and Qin Muyang nowhere in sight, Zhang Jin immediately shook Li Mingchuan awake. Li Mingchuan mumbled, opened his eyes, and found himself resting his head on Zhang Jin's thigh, instantly feeling moved. You let me sleep on you all night. You're too good to me. You're the soulmate of my life. Li Mingchuan gazed at Zhang Jin with eyes full of affection. Zhang Jin returned the same look until the numbness in her leg felt like someone had struck her funny bone with a club. Then she pushed the tenderly gazing Li Mingchuan away. Almost forgot to mention Qin Muyang is gone. Zhang Jin said. Do you think he left when it got light? He said yesterday he was leaving today. He'll go check, Li Mingchuan said, standing up. He added, take a rest before coming out. With that, he pulled open the bathroom door. After surveying the master bedroom, he casually opened its door, stepped into the living room, and called out Qin Muyang. Qin Muyang had just found the iron rod and was planning how to handle 3 zombies alone when he heard Li Mingchuan calling him from the living room. Disaster. Only those 2 words echoed in Qin Muyang's mind. Gripping the rod, he immediately moved to open the bedroom door. Li Mingchuan's next shout rang out, holy shit, zombies. That was followed by the sound of a rapid escape, ending in a fall, furniture clattering, and Li Mingchuan cursing. Qin Muyang opened the door to see Li Mingchuan on the floor, a zombie firmly gripping his ankle. Li Mingchuan's legs flailed wildly, sending furniture crashing. The other 2 zombies were already lunging toward him. That wasn't all. Qin Muyang saw Zhang Jin limping on one leg, yelling, my leg is numb, while charging forward with the chair held high. Hiss, wasn't this woman afraid of zombies? Why was she suddenly so fierce? The stench of love. Qin Muyang glanced at Zhang Jin, shouted, get back, and charged forward with the iron rod. Zhang Jin's heart raced with worry for Li Mingchuan, terrified he might get bitten. Yet fear of the zombies gripped her, and Qin Muyang's shout only left her more confused about what to do. Qin Muyang had no time for her now. This was an emergency. He couldn't care whether she was scared or not. The priority was saving all 3 of them as best he could. Qin Muyang lunged forward, kicking aside the charging zombie, then immediately pivoted and drove the iron rod into the head of the one gripping Li Mingchuan's ankle. With a squelch, viscous fluid splattered into the water on the floor. Qin Muyang withdrew the rod and thrust it at the zombie he had just kicked. A grating sound followed as the zombie collapsed with a splash. Qin Muyang firmly remembered one of his rules. Contact with zombie bodily fluids could lead to infection with the zombie virus. So he quickly covered his eyes with his hand and used his sleeve to shield his mouth and nose, preventing the splashing water from contacting his mucous membranes. In the process, he didn't forget to warn Li Mingchuan, close your eyes, cover your mouth and nose. Still lying on the ground, Li Mingchuan quickly caught on shutting his eyes and covering his mouth and nose with his hands. With a splash, dirty water sprayed everywhere, drenching both Qin Muyang and Li Mingchuan. Li Mingchuan, lying down, had his face nearly completely soaked. Had it not been for Qin Muyang's warning, his eyes and respiratory mucous membranes would likely have been contaminated by the water mixed with zombie fluids. Zhang Jin, standing farther away, was spared the dirty water, but was frozen in shock by the scene. Qin Muyang opened his eyes, wiped the grime from his skin with his sleeve, and then, gripping the rod, finished off the 3rd zombie. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned around and reached out to help Li Mingchuan up. A friend lends you a hand in times like this, but a girlfriend lends you more than a hand, Qin Muyang remarked. For some reason, Zhang Jin's cheeks flushed at those words. Qin Muyang was puzzled. He hadn't said anything special, so why was she blushing like that? Fortunately, he had come out in time. Li Mingchuan hadn't been bitten, though it was unclear if his foot had been scratched. Qin Muyang told Li Mingchuan to carefully check where the zombie had grabbed him. Li Mingchuan was still shaking, his hands trembling slightly. Just as Qin Muyang bent down to help inspect for wounds, he saw Zhang Jin raise the chair she had been holding and hurl it at him. Was Zhang Jin scared out of her mind, or had she gone mad? As Qin Muyang pondered, the chair flew toward his face. But judging by its trajectory, it was off target. Even if he stood still, it wouldn't hit him, only land behind his back. With a thud, the chair struck something behind Qin Muyang before clattering to the floor. He turned around and saw a zombie standing there. There was even a 4th zombie in the room. Qin Muyang hadn't noticed it before. If Zhang Jin hadn't thrown that chair to block it, he would have been bitten by this zombie. He had just misunderstood Zhang Jin, thinking she was about to hit him with the chair. Amid the dripping sound of water inside the room, he couldn't hear the zombie creeping up behind him. Qin Muyang broke out in a cold sweat. He turned around and swiftly dealt with the zombie that had suddenly emerged behind him, only then realizing his forehead was covered in fine beads of sweat. Zhang Jin had grown remarkably fast, transforming in an instant from someone who would be terrified at the sight of a zombie into a person who could accurately throw a chair to strike one. Qin Muyang said to Zhang Jin solemnly, "You saved me for the 2nd time. Thank you." The first time was that day on the street when she directed him from the balcony to take shelter under the awning and then moved his unconscious body into the house. Zhang Jin finally let out a long sigh of relief. You saved both of us. Without you, those 4 zombies would have devoured us. With that, she leaped over and clung to Li Mingxuan like an octopus, holding him tightly. Meanwhile, Li Mingxuan was sobbing loudly, his face wet from either the dripping water from the ceiling or actual tears, looking effeminately sentimental again. Why did Zhang Jin fall for him? Qin Muyang was utterly perplexed. Wait, let me check if you're injured. Zhang Jin got off. Li Mingxuan lovingly rolled up his pant leg and examined his ankle. It's bruised. Will it be okay? Looking at the finger marks left by the zombie on his ankle, both of them were worse. Fortunately, Qin Muyang had experience with this and immediately replied that it was fine. He had been scratched and bruised by zombies before, and as long as the skin wasn't broken, there was no risk of infection. Hearing Qin Muyang's words, the two hugged each other again, weeping with relief that they wouldn't turn into zombies. Li Mingxuan said, You risked yourself by jumping out with that chair. I'm so moved. You're my soulmate for life. Zhang Jin said, I was scared to death thinking you. She then leaped onto Li Mingxuan like an octopus again, acting like a little girl, as if she wasn't the one who had just been glaring fiercely while holding the chair. Unbelievable. Qin Muyang curled his lip, leaving the two to cuddle in the living room as he turned to check if any more zombies had broken into the house. Fortunately, aside from the 4 lying on the floor, there were no other zombies inside. Returning to the living room, the two had already separated and were assessing the damage from the night. The sky was fully bright, displaying a gorgeous blue, as if the storm from last night had been an illusion, if not for the missing windows and the leaking ceiling. The full extent of the damage would only be known after a careful inventory. The 3 of them, wearing ill-fitting, half-damp clothes, paced around the house, lamenting the losses. Except for the master bathroom, every room had been flooded, leaving hardly anything dry. Beds, furniture, and clothes were almost all soaked, and many items from the living room and kitchen had vanished. Several large buckets of water remained, but were contaminated by debris blown in by the wind. Apart from the case of instant noodles rescued last night, the only food left was a few self-heating meals. The rest, stored in the kitchen, had been swept away by the wind. A tornado that came faster than love itself. Worse still, the noise from dealing with the zombies had attracted attention. Now at the entrance door, they could hear zombies pressing against it, producing a grating creak that set their teeth on edge. Li Mingxuan and Zhang Jin stared at the door in terror until they saw Qin Muyang preparing to move a cabinet onto the sofa for extra weight, then they rushed to help. But this was only a temporary measure to block the zombies from entering. What they really needed to do was abandon this place and find a new shelter. The ceiling was still dripping and the floor was barely walkable. Zombie corpses lay in the living room, the kitchen had no food, and almost all water sources were contaminated. This didn't bother Qin Muyang too much, as he had planned to leave today anyway. And luckily, he hadn't lost his iron rod, and his backpack was still safely in the bedroom. What surprised him even more was that the backpack was waterproof. While everything in the bedroom was soaked, the inside of the backpack remained dry. If he slung the backpack on and left now, his plans wouldn't be affected at all. Qin Muyang looked outside at the bright sunny sky. It was still early, and though the air felt a bit oppressive, that wasn't enough to stop him from leaving. Li Mingxuan and Zhang Jin paced around the room, trying to salvage anything not ruined by water and frantically taking wet clothes and bedding out to the balcony to dry. Both were silent, their mood seeming low. Qin Muyang understood why. From the start, they had said they wouldn't leave, intending to wait until their food and water ran out, then either wait for death or end it themselves. But they hadn't anticipated such a natural disaster. Their planned death was for much later, after enduring this life long enough. Not today, not under the devastating blow this disaster had dealt to their lives. Qin Muyang watched them moving around in silence. They didn't seem to have the carefree attitude of someone willing to give up their life, though instead there was a sense of desperate self-preservation. They talked about dying yet struggled to survive. This contradiction existed in these two conflicted souls. Perhaps it was a kind of panic brought on by the zombie outbreak, the change in society, and the unpredictability of Qin Muyang guessed no one could get used to this life, or accept it all within less than a month of the outbreak. He himself hadn't accepted it, he was just gritting his teeth and pushing forward to survive. His mind wandered, thinking that if he left now, while it was still early, he might be able to find useful things based on the nearby map he had drawn earlier. Food, water, a detailed city map, even clothes, medicine. Maybe he could even find a suitable place to spend the night before dusk. But if he left Li Mingxuan and Zhang Jin behind, they would die soon, and he would feel uneasy remembering it later. Moreover, he actually needed companions. They were kind and simple and could become good allies, at least ones who wouldn't harm him. Besides, Zhang Jin had saved him twice. But they were both timid and weak, hardly suitable for surviving outside. This was the apocalypse. An apocalypse with zombies. Such a world needed strong allies. Qin Muyang was torn for a moment, but he didn't dwell on it for long before finding his true heart. Considering the bond they had formed over these days, the 2 times he had been saved, and the fact they had never been stingy with sharing their food. When they first saved him, they were complete strangers. The food Qin Muyang had brought was long gone, and when they gave him theirs, they were essentially sharing their lifeline with him bit by bit. They had already considered him a comrade to live and die with. Besides, Zhang Jin was growing fast, and should be able to face zombies without panic now. Qin Muyang looked at their backs and said in a low voice, "Stop cleaning. This house is no longer livable." Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan turned to look at him. He continued, "Come with me. Let's leave this place." Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan both shook their heads simultaneously, indicating they would not leave this place, for the streets were swarming with zombies. They would rather die than willingly confront the undead. "But your food won't last much longer, and there's hardly any clean water left." Qin Muyang pointed at the chaotic mess of zombie corpses strewn across the floor. "They've contaminated everything in this house. Besides, you can't be sure if there aren't dead zombies upstairs, or if the water dripping down from above carries the zombie virus." Upon hearing Qin Muyang's words, the couple's expressions shifted dramatically. They had never considered the possibility that the water dripping from upstairs could be tainted, assuming that once the soaked items dried out, they would be usable again. Zhang Jin had even thought of simply discarding the polluted water, washing the buckets, and collecting fresh rainwater. Now it was clear things were not so simple. The filthy water in those buckets might not only be dirty from wind-blown debris, but could also contain the zombie. Zhang Jin dropped the bedsheet she had been about to hang out to dry, her gaze fixed on Li Mingchuan. Her intention was unmistakable. Li Mingchuan fell silent, his reluctance to leave evident. He was even more timid than Zhang Jin. His earlier confrontation with their zombified roommate had been solely to protect her. For love for Zhang Jin, he had been willing to overcome his cowardice. But now they were not under immediate threat from zombies. Leaving meant facing the undead heathen, and that was an entirely different matter. It would be inviting danger. Where would we even go if we leave? Can we find another safe place? Qin Muyang shook his head. "I can't promise anything. We might have to keep moving. But it's still better than staying. This door is about to be smashed open by zombies. There's no comfortable place to rest in this house, nor any supplies to sustain us. No sleep, no food, no water, and zombies could break in at any moment. A house like this, would you stay? The choice is yours. If you come with me, I'll do my best to protect you and help you survive longer. But that's all I can promise, my best. I can't guarantee anything. But I'm certain that staying here you won't last long. Make your decision now." Having said this, Qin Muyang fell silent. The couple hesitated for a moment before retreating to a corner to whisper among themselves. After a few minutes, Zhang Jin approached Qin Muyang and extended her hand. "We're teammates now." Qin Muyang shook her hand briefly and immediately began assigning tasks. These two had not ventured outside since the outbreak. They would have to follow his lead in everything, for he had experience. Qin Muyang often entrusted tasks to Zhang Jin, sensing she was more clear-headed and reliable than Li Mingchuan, even though Li was a tall, sturdy man, while Zhang appeared to be a frail young woman. He directed them to gather whatever useful items had survived the storm's fury, lightweight things like ropes, fruit knives, and lighters, along with the meager remaining food and clean water. Fortunately, Li Mingchuan's backpack was still there, slightly damp, but serviceable for carrying these supplies, as the food and water were all packaged. Finally, Qin Muyang found 2 makeshift weapons for them, a stainless steel clothesline pole that had weathered the storm and a lone badminton racket. The stainless steel pole was light, and with the plastic cap at its tip removed, revealed a sharp hollow tube that could serve as a weapon. It wasn't sturdy and might break soon, but it should last a few days. As for the badminton racket, he removed the plastic cap from the handle, and the tape wrapped around it, exposing a sharp hard iron core, enough to pierce a zombie's brain. "I've summed up a few rules you must remember. You already know that bites and scratches can infect you. Contact with a zombie's bodily fluids through a wound or mucous membranes, like in the mouth, nose, or eyes, can also cause infection. It's best not to eat anything a zombie has bitten or touched with its fluids. It could make you sick or kill you outright. Zombies touch such filthy things. No normal person would eat that." Zhang Jin suddenly interjected. Qin Muyang looked at her and said slowly, "If you were starving for a week and came across an injured rabbit with a zombie-bitten leg still alive and hopping around, would you choose to eat it?" Zhang Jin pondered this and realized that had Qin Muyang not warned her, she probably would have caught and roasted that rabbit without a second thought. She shuddered, unsure whether it was from imagining the catastrophic consequences of eating such a creature or from the realization that she would have to struggle to survive in the harsh outside world. Qin Muyang continued, "When killing zombies, the most effective method is to destroy the brain. Only that can finish them off completely. You can strike upward from under the chin or through the mouth or eye socket." As he spoke, he crouched down and demonstrated on a zombie corpse on the floor, making it clear to both of them. "These spots are weak and make it easy to take down a zombie," Qin Muyang said, standing up. "Of course, if you don't have time to aim, you can kick it over, trip it, or just hit any part of its body. Don't just scream or stand there frozen. Sometimes you don't have to kill the zombie. If you can shake it off, running is the safest option. Zombies are most active at night, so you must find shelter before sunset. They are highly sensitive to sound and the smell of blood, and then to movement. Lastly, even someone freshly infected with the zombie virus loses their humanity and is no longer human. Don't cling to the hope that an infected loved one, friend, or partner might still recognize you. At that point, your only options are to stay away or kill them. Qin Muyang had specifically aimed this last rule. Of course, he only wanted them to be aware of this. If one of them got infected and the other chose to die alongside them, there was nothing he could do about it. Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan exchanged glances after hearing Qin Muyang's final point. After a moment, they both nodded and said in unison, "Understood." It had to be said these two sometimes shared a remarkable synchronicity. It was no wonder they had become friends, no lovers, for there was indeed a reason. Seeing that they had committed his words to memory, Qin Muyang began to plan their route. He would stick to the path he had originally set for himself, gather supplies along the way, reach the bookstore, retrieve the map, and then find a way to Beishan University. Everything was ready for their departure, but when they were about to leave the house, the three of them suddenly realized that the corrugated steel shed they had relied on to come and go had vanished overnight. Looking out from the balcony, they could see that the exteriors of many surrounding buildings had changed. The streets were littered with a chaotic mess of garbage. Shattered windows and doors, waterlogged mattresses, plastic bags, and bottles in every color. Qin Muyang even spotted a fish weighing at least 5 or 6 gene flopping in the street. Some zombies were pinned under debris, others staggered about missing limbs, and some with disheveled clothes and soaked hair looked even more terrifying, a maddening, horrifying sight. The absence of the steel shed meant they had no choice but to leave via the stairs. There were zombies in the stairwell. This was beyond doubt, for they were even now battering against the entrance door. What do we do? The courage that Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan had mustered to leave was on the verge of evaporating when Qin Muyang suddenly had an idea. In older buildings like this, the stairways were narrow, which meant a large number of zombies couldn't possibly gather there. The staircase couldn't accommodate a horde. If they left a narrow opening in the entrance door, lured the zombies from the stairs up, and then dealt with them one by one, they could escape safely. This method wasn't just safe, it also gave Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan a chance to experience killing zombies firsthand, training their practical skills and fortitude. With this in mind, Qin Muyang immediately shared his plan with the two. As expected, Zhang Jin stayed silent and looked at Li Mingchuan, who in turn showed some hesitation. But after a moment's thought, he reluctantly agreed. Given the state of the entrance door, even if he refused, it wouldn't be long before the zombies broke in and made a meal of him anyway. After Qin Muyang reviewed with the two how to handle the zombies, he stepped forward, moved aside the cabinet and sofa, and slowly opened the door. Of course, he didn't open it fully, just enough for a single zombie to pass through. He quickly used the sofa to brace the door, preventing the gap from widening further. Immediately, a zombie squeezed through the doorway and staggered into the living room. Qin Muyang raised his iron rod and thrust it cleanly through its eye socket, piercing its skull and ending it. By then, a second zombie had entered. Without pause, Qin Muyang stepped forward and thrust his rod again. This time, he aimed deliberately for the zombie's mouth, one whose lips had rotted away. As it opened its mouth to snarl, Qin Muyang drove the rod inside. For the next zombie, he lowered his stance and thrust upward from beneath the chin, near the throat, sending the iron rod clean through its head. Repeating this several times, he had dispatched 7 zombies. Qin Muyang stepped back. "My demonstration is over. Your turn." He moved to the side. Out in the open, taking down several zombies in a row would have been exhausting. But here it felt like waiting for prey to fall into a trap. No great effort needed for dodging or aiming, just mechanical thrusts with a bit of force. Zhang Jin stepped up to the position Qin Muyang had just vacated. A zombie emitting guttural sounds squeezed through the vermilion security door and lunged toward her. Seeing its writhing mouth, its ashen skin, its patchy hair, and catching the stench of rotting flesh, Zhang Jin suddenly felt fear and hesitated. Gripping her clothes pole, she took a step back. The zombie advanced a few more steps, drawing ever closer. With a grim expression, she steeled herself and thrust the pole forward. But seized by terror and cowardice, she shut her eyes tight at the moment of the thrust. The pole struck the zombie's neck, piercing its trachea. This produced an even more horrifying sound from the zombie, caused by the ruptured windpipe. Trembling, Zhang Jin hurriedly tried to pull the pole back out. But the more nervous and flustered she became, the more the pole stuck. The zombie was nearly upon her. Just then, Qin Muyang, standing to the side, swiftly raised his iron rod and drove it through the zombie's temple. The zombie's clawing hands dropped, and it fell to the ground, still impaled by the clothes pole. Only then did Zhang Jin, still shaken, manage to yank the pole free. "How was that?" Qin Muyang asked. She shook her head. "Scared me, but I'm okay." Another one. Another one. Just then another zombie entered. This time Zhang Jin wasn't as terrified. She aimed for its eye socket and when she thrust, she didn't shut her eyes in panic like before. The clothes pole slid smoothly into the zombie's skull and came out just as easily. She felt the sensation of using her own strength to pierce through a zombie's head, an indescribable feeling. In that instant, she experienced the security she could provide for herself, sensed her own power, and felt the fragility of life. Human life was fragile, but a zombie's life wasn't much sturdier. Another one, Zhang Jin declared. Qin Muyang helped her move the zombie corpses blocking the doorway, allowing her better room to maneuver and a clear path to dodge or flee in case of an emergency. Li Mingchuan stood far off watching. His face was pale and his hands and feet felt weak. After Zhang Jin had killed 4 zombies, Qin Muyang saw that she had grasped how to deal with them. He told her to rest and called for Li Mingchuan. Li Mingchuan was an odd one. Timid, often refusing suggestions at first, but after some thought he would agree. Earlier, when Qin Muyang proposed he come along, his first instinct was to refuse, but he later agreed. Now called upon to kill zombies, his first reaction was also refusal, but he quickly acquiesced. Perhaps he knew there was no escaping it. To survive, this hurdle had to be crossed. Gripping the badminton racket, Li Mingchuan slowly walked to the door. He held the racket upside down with the handle outward, exposing the unwrapped metal rod. He was so nervous that sweat beaded on his forehead, but no zombie emerged from the doorway. Qin Muyang had to reach out with his iron rod and tap against the door. After 2 minutes, a zombie with a bald, scalpless head shambled in. As soon as it entered, the zombie lunged at Li Mingchuan, jaws wide. Panicking, Li Mingchuan completely forgot everything Qin Muyang had taught him. He simply swung the racket at the zombie's body, flailing, as if he were play fighting with a classmate. The zombie was utterly unfazed by his blows, continuing its charge with its mouth agape. Only then did Li Mingchuan remember he was supposed to thrust. But he couldn't recall where to aim, so he jabbed randomly at the zombie's body with the racket handle. As he stabbed, he yelled wildly. Fortunately, water was still dripping in the room, muffling his shouts, so they didn't. Seeing this, Qin Muyang moved to help, but Zhang Jin stopped him. "Let me," she said, stepping forward. Li Mingchuan suddenly stopped yelling. "Don't help me." He continued stabbing frantically, managing to land 2 hits that destroyed the zombie's brain. The zombie collapsed, and he stood there panting heavily. Watching Li Mingchuan gasp as if his lungs might burst, Qin Muyang almost gave up, thinking he could just keep him in the middle and protect him as much as possible. But Li Mingchuan panted, "Let me try once more." With that, he actively tapped the racket outside the door, luring in another zombie. This time, he didn't stab wildly. The moment the zombie entered, he aimed directly for its eye socket and thrust. The zombie dropped instantly. Li Mingchuan was still panting hard. "It seems it's not that scary." Qin Muyang was about to say that this was under controlled indoor conditions, so of course it wasn't that terrifying. Outside, when being chased by a horde of zombies, you would know fear. But after a moment's thought, he decided not to scare these 2, otherwise they might refuse to leave again and stay here to await death. It had been no easy feat persuading them to follow and even willingly kill zombies. Observing their recent performance, Qin Muyang felt quite satisfied. They were not as weak as he had imagined. With a few days of outdoor experience, they might just become the formidable companions he sought. Good. This was not a loss. Qin Muyang instructed them to quickly regulate their breathing and rest while he waited by the door to see if any zombies would approach. Good. This was not a loss. Qin Muyang instructed them to quickly regulate their breathing and rest while he waited by the door to see if any zombies would approach. Corridors. It was time to depart. Li Mingchuan and Qin Muyang each shouldered a backpack laden with all the useful supplies they could carry. Zhang Jin followed behind with a drying pole relatively unburdened. Qin Muyang took the lead, stepping into the stairwell. The corridor was dim, but not so dark that objects were indiscernible. Qin Muyang first checked both up and down the stairs, finding nothing unusual, then gestured for the 2 to follow as he descended. Originally, Qin Muyang had planned the formation with himself at the front, Zhang Jin in the middle, and Li Mingchuan bringing up the rear. But Zhang Jin doubted Li Mingchuan's ability to cover the rear. In her words, Li Mingchuan is half a beat slow. Don't count on him for urgent matters. For decisions that need careful deliberation, he's reliable enough. She knew Li Mingchuan well. Once outside, matters of survival and zombies would be urgent, demanding immediate action. Fearing that Li Mingchuan might make choices detrimental to their escape, Zhang Jin ultimately took on the crucial role of guarding the rear. Qin Muyang couldn't help but admire Zhang Jin once more. Her growth and transformation were remarkably swift as she adapted to this new world. In contrast, Li Mingchuan still seemed timid, never taking the initiative, only changing and facing danger when it was imminent and unavoidable. Yet many people in life were like that, trapped in their own little world, only emerging to accept reality when change was inevitable. Their footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Despite their efforts to muffle the sound, the old building's resonance and echoes betrayed them. Fortunately, they lived on the 3rd floor, and the downstairs neighbors had their doors closed. No immediate threats were detected except for a zombie on the 1st floor with its leg caught in the stair railing, which Qin Muyang dispatched with ease. Reaching the ground floor and stepping out the building's entrance, they felt the full force of last night's storm. A tree over 30 centimeters in diameter had been uprooted, solar water heaters from the roof lay shattered on the ground, and a TV cabinet from someone's living room blocked the exit. Qin Muyang and Li Mingchuan pushed hard several times, finally forcing a narrow passage wide enough for one person. They filed out of the building. This likely explained why no more zombies had come upstairs despite Qin Muyang's earlier noises. The blocked entrance prevented their ascent. 2 zombies roamed outside the TV cabinet. Qin Muyang dealt with them effortlessly, leaving none for Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan. Out here it was better to handle manageable threats himself, leaving them to the novices might invite unforeseen. Stepping out of the building, golden sunlight bathed them. Though stiflingly hot, Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan simultaneously stretched their arms, basking in the sun's caress. It had been a long time since they had descended and felt the sun's warmth underfoot. But no sooner had they loosened up than Qin Muyang murmured, "Stay focused. The situation is dire." Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan tensed, instantly gripping their weapons tightly, scanning around like invaders entering a village. Then Qin Muyang pointed toward the direction of the community gate. Following his gesture, they saw a fallen sapling blocking the gate. Amidst the leaves, a dense crowd of zombies lingered, seemingly trying to break through the tree into the community, but entangled in the thick branches they struggled to advance. Earlier, when looking out from upstairs, they couldn't see this direction and thought the streets were nearly devoid of zombies. Little did they know the creatures had gathered here. Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan couldn't help but feel their limbs go weak. Though they had killed zombies before, it was indoors with only a few. Now, a mere dozen meters away, a thick mass of zombies loomed. The stench of rain-soaked earth mingled with the putrid odor of decay assailed their nostrils, and the chilling growls from the zombies' throats were unmistakable. If those zombies broke through the tree and charged at them, it would be a gruesome scene. "Does the community have another exit?" Qin Muyang asked. In truth, he wanted Li Mingchuan and Zhang Jin to lead the way, but considering their inexperience in this world, he refrained from putting them at risk. If a zombie suddenly leaped out from a corner, startling them into screams, or if they failed to react and got bitten, the loss would be too great. It was better for him to take the lead and have them guide him, especially since he had promised to do his utmost to ensure. Li Mingchuan pointed in the opposite direction of the main gate. "Go to the end there, turn left, and you'll find another exit." Qin Muyang nodded and strode forward, as if the menacing horde of zombies were nothing to him. Li Mingchuan tightened his grip on the badminton racket and whispered to Zhang Jin behind him, "Stay close." Li Mingchuan's injured leg had healed, and he moved swiftly now. Zhang Jin, being a woman, struggled to keep pace with Qin Muyang and Li Mingchuan, prompting Li Mingchuan to remind her. Zhang Jin didn't reply but quickened her steps. The community was filled with various foul odors mingling into a nauseating stench that urged them to leave quickly. The ground was littered with garbage and obstacles from last night's storm, with deep puddles in some places. Qin Muyang had to repeatedly deter, deviating from their intended path. Under normal conditions, it would take only minutes to reach the exit Li Mingchuan mentioned, but after circumventing obstacles for over 10 minutes, they had only covered half the distance. Qin Muyang was nearly lost, but Li Mingchuan's familiarity with the community allowed him to accurately pinpoint the exit's location regardless of the detours. With still a fair distance to go, Qin Muyang spotted a dozen or so zombies loitering ahead. Behind the buildings there might be even more. There was only one path forward, and it was the only route to the exit. Qin Muyang halted, raising his hand to signal the 2 behind him to stop. Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan, catching his gesture, also spotted the zombies ahead. Tattered clothes, ashen gray skin, murky white eyes, and large chunks of rotting flesh. Liver spots, ulcerations, bite marks, decayed tissue. The shocking sight stirred a desire to retreat in Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan, urging them to turn and flee. Yet reason told them they must not run, must not do that. The zombies had not noticed them yet. If they bolted, it might backfire, drawing the creatures in pursuit. But if they didn't run, were they supposed to charge in and fight? Surely Qin Muyang wasn't that reckless. Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan fixed their eyes on his back, waiting for his next move. After all, it was agreed before they set out he would make the calls in emergencies. He had the experience. Qin Muyang slowly stepped back, light and cautious, until he was level with Li Mingchuan. Then he spoke. "The zombies don't look too numerous, just over a dozen." Listen to the man. Was that human? Over a dozen, and he called that few. Only someone who had been chased by a horde could say such a thing. Li Mingchuan silently grumbled as Qin Muyang continued. "Over a dozen aren't hard to handle. But we don't know if more are lurking in the blind spots behind those buildings. Rushing in to deal with these few only to attract a larger horde wouldn't be worth it." Li Mingchuan thought, "Even without more zombies, I wouldn't dare take on a dozen of them. Just say we need to find another. So let's move quietly back up, slowly return the way we came, and find a new path." Qin Muyang whispered, then began to retreat. He had no intention of risking everyone's safety just to reach the neighborhood exit a little faster. Qin Muyang knew a crucial truth about surviving outside. When you can, you can. Oh, when you can't, you can't. Never overestimate yourself, or you might lose your life. Seeing Qin Muyang's decisive withdrawal, Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan quickly followed. Yet despite their stealthy movements, a zombie spotted them. Roar! The zombie let out a thunderous howl and shambled toward them. This triggered a chain reaction. All a dozen zombies turned, fixing their murky eyes on the trio. Haha! Whoosh! The zombies emitted excited sounds of prey found and immediately gave chase. We've been spotted. Li Mingchuan gripped his badminton racket until his veins bulged, as if holding tighter would make him safer. Qin Muyang glanced back at the zombies and saw their numbers swelling beyond a dozen. Those buildings had indeed concealed a massive horde. Thank goodness they hadn't recklessly engaged the few, but being chased by so many was no easy feat. Qin Muyang urged run. At this point, noise didn't matter. With so many zombies on their tail, trying to stay quiet to escape was clearly what they needed now was speed, as fast as possible. As he ran, Qin Muyang noticed that Li Mingchuan, whose fracture had only just healed, seemed even faster than him, a trained athlete. Fear truly unlocked human potential. Zhang Jin, however, couldn't keep up with the two men and lagged. The road was still slick from last night's rain, caused her to slip and fall. The zombies quickly closed in. Yet even then she didn't scream or call out to the men ahead. Fortunately, Qin Muyang turned back to check how many zombies were following and saw Zhang Jin fall, with one creature lunging at her. Damn it! Qin Muyang broke out in a cold sweat. The distance between them was too great. He couldn't reach. In desperation, he hurled his iron rod at the zombie while sprinting toward Zhang Jin. The rod flew through the air with a piercing sound and lodged into the zombie's knee. The creature lost its balance, veered off course, and crashed into a nearby tree instead of Zhang Jin. Seeing her temporary reprieve, Zhang Jin didn't hesitate. She rolled over, grabbed a nearby clothes pole, and thrust it at the zombie. It didn't hit a vital spot, but forced the zombie back 2 steps. By then, Qin Muyang had reached her side. He didn't help her up immediately. Instead, he crouched, yanked the rod from the zombie's knee, swiftly took it down, and then turned to pull Zhang Jin to her feet. Her knees were scraped, and her elbows were raw. A painful fall. She seemed unsteady, likely affecting her ability to run. Qin Muyang examined her injuries and asked any other wounds. Are your bones okay? Zhang Jin shook. Just then Li Mingchuan, who had run far ahead, realized something was wrong and returned. His comeback surprised. So you remembered to come back? Qin Muyang said, eyeing him. I thought you'd abandoned your girlfriend. Zhang Jin quickly interjected, we broke up. Qin Muyang shot them a look of disbelief, then shrugged off his backpack and tossed it to Li Mingchuan. There are band-aids inside. Cover all her wounds. He'll hold off the zombies. More were closing in. Qin Muyang stepped forward, iron rod in hand, positioning himself in front of the pair, and warned, make sure the wounds are fully covered, or you know the consequences. He had already warned them contact between wounds and zombie fluids could lead to infection. Li Mingchuan tended to her carefully. As the zombies charged, Qin Muyang had already calculated his moves. How to pierce an eye socket, how to use the corpse to block the next attack. There were too many. He had planned to hold his ground until Li Mingchuan finished, but the pressure forced him back a step, then another. In no time, Qin Muyang had taken down 7 or 8 zombies, sweat beading on his forehead. The main horde was approaching, no fewer than 20. He kept fighting while shouting, hurry up. I can't hold much longer. Done, Li Mingchuan replied. Without a word, Qin Muyang turned, hoisted Zhang Jin onto his back, tossed his backpack to Li Mingchuan, and Li Mingchuan froze for a second, then grabbed the backpack and followed at Qin Muyang's shout of run. A torrent of zombies surged behind them, their roars chilling to the bone. Luckily, they hadn't been out long and still had plenty of stamina. Those zombies never tired, they couldn't match their speed. Soon the horde was left far behind. Li Mingchuan ran beside Qin Muyang, directing him to detour close to the community exit while eliminating zombies that sprang out along the way. Li Mingchuan was relatively less adept at dealing with zombies, sometimes struggling to take down even a single one. Qin Muyang had to have Zhang Jin wrap her arms around his neck while he freed his hands to help clear the undead. After a while, the pursuing zombies slackened their chase and Qin Muyang slowed his pace. Carrying such a heavy person in a frantic sprint felt almost like physical endurance training. But he couldn't let Li Mingchuan carry Zhang Jin either. With his slender arms and legs, if he hoisted her on his back, they'd both end up as zombie fodder. Catching his breath, Qin Muyang asked, why didn't you call out when you fell? Zhang Jin remained silent. Li Mingchuan glanced at Qin Muyang, but said nothing. Realizing his tone might have been too harsh, and that questioning Zhang Jin like that in front of Li Mingchuan was inappropriate, Qin Muyang quickly added, you almost got bitten just now. It was dangerous. You should have called us. Zhang Jin still didn't speak, but Li Mingchuan broke the silence. She was afraid of holding us back. Li Mingchuan knew Zhang Jin well. She's stubborn to a fault. In a situation like this, she'd rather risk her own life than let us face danger. Besides, she didn't know how formidable you are. With her inner thoughts laid bare, Zhang Jin nodded subtly. Qin Muyang said solemnly, "We're teammates. I told you when I asked you to follow me that I'd do my best to keep you safe. In such moments, the first thing you should do is let us know you're in danger. Whether we can save you or not is a separate matter. Don't think of yourself as a burden. Your shout might alert us to impending danger and could even save our lives." On Qin Muyang's back, Zhang Jin murmured, "We're teammates." Li Mingchuan added, "If you're too embarrassed to call him, at least call me. If I lost you, my best friend, I'd never forgive myself." Qin Muyang thought, here it comes again, that nauseating romantic vibe. Why does Li Mingchuan always sound so ambiguously affectionate? Qin Muyang declared, "In the days ahead, we'll share fortune and face adversity together." "What do we do next?" Zhang Jin asked. "It seems I can't walk for now, but carrying me all the time won't. Let's leave the community first and find a decent place outside to rest," Qin Muyang said. "At the very least, it needs to be dry. We've barely been out of the building for an hour, and now we need to find another place to rest," Li Mingchuan sighed. "Don't assume it's easy to find a suitable spot out there. It might take half a day just to locate one." Qin Muyang knew they had no real sense of the outside world, so Li Mingchuan's remark didn't surprise him. He continued, "To survive in a world like this, rest is crucial. As long as we keep moving forward, time is of little consequence. Besides, I barely slept last night and really need a place to rest. It's fortunate that Zhang Jin can't walk anymore. Let's find a spot now." In this world, now time had lost all value. What mattered was the will to survive. In truth, money had become useless. Measuring things by value no longer seemed apt. Under Li Mingchuan's guidance, they finally found the community exit, encountering only a few scattered zombies along the way. Several of those were taken down by Li Mingchuan, who had mustered his courage. It was his first time killing zombies outside, a feat worthy of encouragement. If not for carrying Zhang Jin, Qin Muyang would have applauded. Meanwhile, Li Mingchuan longed to carry Zhang Jin himself and leave the zombies to Qin Muyang. But he knew his stamina. Even if he could carry Zhang Jin, he certainly wouldn't be as agile as Qin Muyang, who could move swiftly while burdened with a person. At that moment, the gap between a trained athlete and an ordinary person became evident. Li Mingchuan could at best carry Zhang Jin at a slow, steady pace for about 10 minutes. So he chose to lead the way and kill zombies. Fortunately, they managed to avoid most of the undead on the road. Once out of the community gate, he finally grasped the bleak desolation Qin Muyang had described earlier. The once bustling streets were now littered with debris and obstacles blown in by the wind last night. Damaged vehicles and broken roadside trees filled the area, along with mud and aimlessly wandering zombies. They had only seen such scenes in movies and games before. The joy of escaping the zombie horde vanished instantly as they glimpsed the arduous and uncertain path ahead. Going back was impossible. Their previous shelter was not only flooded but also lacked windows, with nearly all food and water destroyed. They had no choice but to follow Qin Muyang and press on. Yet Qin Muyang himself had no idea where their future lay, only that they had to move forward step by step. For now, the priority was to find a suitable place where everyone could rest peacefully. None of them had slept well the previous night, and they had spent the early morning cleaning the flooded room, fighting zombies, and then rushing about. Time was nearing noon, and the sun blazed fiercely. They had hoped to follow the hand-drawn map Qin Muyang had made to locate the planned convenience store, pharmacy, and bookstore. But once on the street, nothing was as they had imagined. The path they needed to take was blocked by accident scenes or uprooted trees, with zombies growling in the... Under such circumstances, they couldn't proceed directly and had to take detours. Detours meant covering much more ground, and those alternate routes were equally fraught with obstacles. After several detours, they found themselves increasingly far from their target, even reaching areas unfamiliar to Li Mingchuan and Zhang Jin. This was a disaster. They were once again wandering aimlessly through the city. Qin Muyang looked up at the sky, sensing something ominous. The weather seemed reminiscent of a typhoon passing through. He voiced his suspicion quietly. "We need to find a suitable place to settle quickly. The situation from last night might recur." Zhang Jin and Li Mingchuan didn't fully understand, but chose to trust him. After walking a bit further, the weather indeed shifted. The clear, cloudless sky was suddenly overrun with dark clouds. Dark clouds pressing down on the city, threatening to destroy it, aptly described the scene before them. Watching the rolling waves of clouds nearly touching the rooftops, all three felt a sense of foreboding. The wind arrived without warning, carrying rain that slanted almost parallel to the ground. They had never seen rain at such an angle, a phenomenon only possible under fierce winds. "It's a typhoon," Qin Muyang confirmed. Beishan, a northern coastal city, had rarely experienced typhoons, so they initially thought it was just an extreme storm. Only now did Qin Muyang realize what they were facing. He knew the situation would worsen, bringing torrential rain and unrelenting gales until the typhoon passed or its force diminished. This could take a considerable amount of time, and they had to find shelter immediately. Being outdoors during a typhoon was perilous, with the risk of being struck and killed by debris hurled by the wind. Moreover, the heavy rain would cause urban flooding, and the powerful suction of drains could swallow a person whole, leaving no trace. Perhaps the reason there were fewer zombies on the streets today than Qin Muyang had encountered before was due to last night's violent storm. The clear weather they had experienced was an illusion, a sign that Beishan had entered the eye of the typhoon.